Before I actually start, first thing is welcome to the OBA in Amsterdam. Hopefully that you all can see that it's a lovely event and that we're really proud of what we found. And yeah, so it'd be nice to get feedback if if you're happy with the event, and not only from the venue, but obviously everything to do with everything you see today. Before I can go on to the actual introducing our first speaker, which is Rodrigo, we need to do a little bit of housekeeping. If the fire alarm goes, the exits go out into the reception area. If you are going out this door, then you go to the exit to the left. What I suggest on this side is you go into the far towards the river, and there's an exit inside the restaurant. If you actually can also be respectful to the library, that when you go out for lunch, it is actually a library, like I just said. So we need to make sure that we're respectful to the people that are in to read their books. And also, we can't have you flat smacking people, and we can't have you leaving labels and leaflets around, because we do not want to be disrespectful to the OBA, because they're being flexible with us, they're working with us closely. And on a side note, we've actually had a journalist that is actually rang up the OBA. They're trying to cause trouble by saying, "Did you realise there's a convention going on?" And they're not trying to do it from an information point of view. They're actually trying to just create disharmony. That's a bit of a shame. So what I want us to do is be respectful to the people in the library, and then if we do our bit, then if anyone else wants to cause trouble, that's down to them. So anyway, I'm going to introduce Rodrigo. Before I do that, I just want to say that there's me walking around hot in a T-shirt, and he was walking around with a coat half an hour ago, and I just think it's funny. So I'm not going to talk about his speech, because he's going to do a good job on that. But Rodrigo, please.
Hello, everybody. How are you doing this morning? I hopefully I don't put you back to sleep as we're waking up here and getting started for an amazing day of presentations. And I'm really looking forward to listening to some of these people speak, because they were important in my journey into this. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I called the burden of non-misrepresentation. What we know from looking into this information, this movement, is that there's a lot of marginalization, and that journalists wouldn't hesitate to misrepresent the people that they're portraying in a malicious way. I found, as I looked more and more into different media pieces as they started to flow out. And in my case, once I deconstructed, I guess you can say, or analyze a piece by The Guardian, then my channel was blocked. Once it got 500 views, they blocked it worldwide. There's censorship against critical thinking. If you look at any piece of media and you want to analyze it, see how people speak, what they mean, what ideas they're using in the media, you may not be allowed to, because they're going to give you a copyright strike on YouTube, for instance. So you may not reach an audience, and they might block your thing all over the world. I was just basically exposing them. And we know that journalists don't have much time to study. They have to just look at other journalists, what they're doing. And they're not scholars. And so why people take the news seriously, it's amazing, but they do. So what we have here, in the case of the anthropologist, that takes on the burden of non-misrepresentation. That means you cannot talk about people in a way they don't want you to talk about them. You cannot really twist their words and say things they haven't said, right? And this comes just from the practice of social and cultural anthropology, the ethics of the practice, of description of ethnography, and our technique, or if you want to condense it, it's called participant observation. And anthropology deals with kind of some of the explanations from the descriptions from our engagement with different communities. In this case, I decided to talk to people in the first hand. As you see, you're going to hear bits from some conversations. And I've, thanks to Iro Landucci, attended a couple of conferences in Barcelona where I was invited, because Iro, there has been this thing in the movement that in the very beginning there's a lot of skepticism against academics in general, people with PhDs in particular, because they are the symbol of the kind of brainwashing, the person that went through the whole system and made it, so to speak. But that only blocks access from people like me and other people who are academics, who are actually not part of that game that actually, from within, try to resist the many issues with academia right now that it's basically crumbling. Because, and as I found, transhumanist funding, this really connects. If any of you heard of Jeffrey Epstein, what he was up to, his ideas, where was his money going? You have a massive apparatus of transhumanists, eugenics, racists that go back to Darwin. You can trace them back to colonialists and slavery and Darwin and so on. And they have a new garb, which is technological, technocratic. And transhumanism as a futuristic idea wants to clamp machines into your brain and make you live forever in space, probably. They love that story, right? And they think that's really smart, whereas I think it's completely dumb. So they talk about this thing, artificial intelligence. I think it's artificial stupidity, because they're basically writing themselves into the code. And they're not very smart, because they're transhumanists. They believe you can freeze a body and revive it later on, even if it has a bunch of cancers. They really want to hang on. They're materialists to the core. They don't understand spirituality that we see all over the world with different indigenous peoples that anthropologists have studied, including their marginalization. And what we see here is that with globe skeptics, which I call globe skeptics because as the people from the tour found out, if they go around with the van saying flat earth, they get attacked. It's like a trigger word that has been inscribed through mind programming. In a lot of people, they say, flat earth, they say, it must be stupid. So people have shifted their identity. So it's a new form of relatedness, which is globe skepticism. Even when I talked to Jaron, he was saying, yeah, if I wish I'd changed that in the very beginning, because you didn't see the backlash. And Jaron has been one of the people that have taken the most backlash. And people have lied a lot about things he says, and his experiment, for instance, in Behind the Curve. A lot of people get information, what is the flat earth moving through Behind the Curve? And it's a deceptive piece. I picked it apart in an 8-hour series. And as you know, journalists don't have the time even to read. They barely read. They have to read the other news so they can know what to talk about. How will they have time to go through all this information? Hundreds of hours from either Landucci and Jaron, and even my work, and Paul on the Plane, for instance, has a Faking Space series that's actually easy to watch because it's condensed. It shows you how they're faking the Himalaya satellite that people think that is actually taking photos of the Earth. So people barely know what they're looking into it. And this is one of the things we see, that when people come out to try and debate flat earthers, they get a whoop. They are schooled all the time, as we saw this with Dave Murphy as well, in a debate that I analyzed. And we see that over and over. Iru just last week talked to people in Argentina in a debate. I thought they were students. That's how unprepared they were. They looked like students. They acted like students that barely knew the information that he was going to talk about. They admitted not to have even looked into what he was going to say before they came to try to debate him. And they just show their ignorance, completely unprepared. And some of them actually was like, yeah, I think we should question stuff. It was just pretty amazing to watch. And at the end, they were geologists. They were actual professionals. And when Iru said something like, we need to look at the history. Who created the system? The Jesuits. And they're like, huh, history? Who needs to know this? Science moves forward. Why do you look back at history? That's the black hole of history that they have, especially in the sciences. They barely know. They don't have the time. They give you this kind of practical idea. You have to memorize everything that's been accumulated. You cannot question your foundations. The foundations are super solid. It's Newton with gravity. Then, now Einstein turned it around. The curving of space and time, it can happen. You can see it. They demonstrate it, right? Have you experienced the curvature of space and time? Anybody? Right? It's second nature. Everybody can feel it. And quantum mechanics and then string theory, all these things supposedly match. No, they don't match. None of it matches. Then you have the multiverse theory. Just talk about anything. You're an elk that speaks and flies in a balloon and it puts eggs, and that's the multiverse thing. So that anything goes in astrophysics with math. And I don't know if I'm going to have time, because I end up going on for too long and improvising. And I've done that way too much. It's been 20 minutes. And what we see here, I'm just going to connect some of these things here really quickly. They're all connected, but, and I'm just going to draw some lines here. Here, anthropology is very important. This is how it differs from physics and other kinds of things. In physics, you get the little theorem with the math, and you're going to try to apply it, and whatever, you reduce it. In anthropology, our theory comes from actual experience, being there with people, understanding how they put things together. Theories are made up of words and concepts. And very importantly, through the insight of Bourdieu that I'm following, there are these perception categories. Space, for example, the space mythology provides all these perception categories for Globers to think according to that, what we call epistemology. And then, okay, that led me into a participant observation of this group that's questioning unquestionables. There's these foundational unquestionables can never be questioned. And I just gave you a cursive kind of, Newton and Einstein, it doesn't match. All these things, they don't match. So who is right, who is wrong? They make everything, what we see later on when you look into this is that double think is this thing that's been embedded into the whole mentality of how this works. Things that shouldn't happen at the same time happen at the same time. So there's so many examples of space. One of them being, how can they cross the Van Allen belts in the 60s and then it's so deadly and then they say, oh, we didn't know it was there. We didn't have to think about it, so we can just cross it. That's what the astronaut says. It's fine. So there's that wall. If I didn't know it was there, I could just cross it. It's what they tell you. It's essentially, it's kind of the logic. It goes on and on. So Chris Hadfield says, when you're ready to go on the rocket, you get taken, it's like taken by a dog and dressed around and shot around. You have this, you're locked to your seat. He tells this whole dramatic story. And then, poof, you're off and the particles are flying, this beautiful non-gravity all of a sudden. After they accelerated from 0 to 17,000 miles an hour to get to whatever escape velocity is, right? That nobody can do that acceleration, you melt. But he can do it. He can tell you, you've on TED Talks, but then they show you the Soyuz launch. And what are they doing? They're going like this. The thing is going up, they're laughing, like, it's great. They're not feeling anything. You see that. It's fake, and you can see once the rocket goes up, there's all these things you're going to see here, I'm pretty sure. So we know that space is a reality show production. And the people here, they're being marginalized and attacked simply because they're questioning this. And they, for instance, Iro he's a technician of special effects. He knows how to make animations. He knows how these things work. He actually showed in one of his studies that different launches from different rocket launches from different times sending satellites to space had the exact same video showing the rocket going up live with the same flares, the same things moving the same direction, the same way. It's amazing how space can do. 6 different launches with the exact same video, right? And people are paying up to hundreds of millions of dollars for each launch. It's good. It's good. It's a good scam. It's great. It works. And people love it because it has a lot to do with the science fiction, scientism, dystopian, transhumanist futurism, which is artificial stupidity. Now they want to control us with artificial so-called intelligence. And it's all connected to this mockingbird predictive programming media that we have. That the less they know they're being manipulated, the better it is in that case. And so the mainstream media and the news, and they're all linked to this reductionism, scientism, and the evolutionism, which are things that basically use mathematics to reduce reality to a simplistic model. So one of the greatest achievements of the transhumanists for their own sake is to turn Darwin, who's sort of an idiot, into a genius. And many other people, like Stephen Hawking and Richard Dawkins, who was on the plane with Jeffrey Epstein. Many times, nobody talks about that. Oh, Richard Dawkins, he's like the god of the atheists, talking about biology and humans being lumbering robots controlled by DNA. It's like his books are science fiction or comedy, at the very least. It's terrible. You can barely read it. But he's idolized because he's taking money from the eugenicist apparatus and transhumanists. That explains it all. It explains a lot to me, at least. And now I don't know what the time is. I'm confused with the time here. I think we have still 15 minutes. Am I correct? Oh, I have 33 minutes. Ooh. Oh no, 33, 31, 33, 30, okay. So one of the important questions is, how do we know what we know? How do we know that we know what we think we know? And this is one of the things that many of these people, many people in this community have been looking at. So how do you know that there are these satellites in space? How do you really know that it's a ball? Can you go around the world and make observations and zoom? They would tell, the first thing they would tell Bill Nye, who's going to show you a curved surface, and say, yeah, this boat's going over the rise so easy, it goes over the rise and 3 meters away. That sounds more like Bill Clinton. But, and you go and you try to take a look, and it's not. You just bring it back to a rise. And so there's some, what's his name? Reality something. You guys know? Visible reality, not ODD. He's a new guy. He only films things in the distance with this camera. No, it's not Jay Tolan. It's not the guy. Jay Tolan also incredible. Observable reality. This guy has a video that shows a boat that starts going in the distance, and really it seems like it floats. It turns into this thing that goes up because of the effects that are going on. So we know that it's not what they told you in very simplistic terms on TV while you're thinking that Bill Nye is some authority or anything. You don't know he's an actor. Or Brian Cox, you think he's smart. You don't know he's an actor. Or you think Neil deGrasse Tyson is super smart. You don't know he has been accused of date raping people. And he's also contradicting himself over and over and over and over again. People have picked that apart. And these are people who are portrayed in the media as geniuses. And as I was saying, anybody portrayed in the media as a genius most likely ain't. That's what we know. So my work has been looking into this conditioning that happens, and how can such a taken for granted dominant cosmology, that is the globe, when you go around and ask people, why do you believe the globe and the ball, be so unquestionable? Because people want to defend it, they want to attack you. You cannot even question it. You have to be attacked. You have to be put on the media and lied about, like Jaron, like a lot of people here, like Bob, who's not here, unfortunately. So how can it be so unknown? Well, you see, when you look into this and you take a step back and see, let's see how the Globers interact with the globe skeptics. And what you see is that the Globers barely know what they're talking about. They don't know. They just cite from textbooks. So Jaron says all the time, like, why would they even be talking to these guys? They point to a textbook and says, here it is. They don't go to the world. They're not taught how to measure the world and come up with their own observations. It's not what science is all about. It's memorizing formula, because it's been turned into a mathematic sort of reality. Everything is reduced to their little formulas, and math is supposed to stand for reality. It's exactly what we saw when Dave Murphy debates this guy, Pierre Lassorac, who says math is reality. He doesn't say it. He doesn't know. And you talk about density. Dave makes dozens of points, talks about density, how you can observe density, magnetism, and so on. The guy barely knows how to speak. He couldn't even put sentences together. Something I saw when I was in Shetland as well recently, and somebody tried to challenge me who had a science degree. And I'm a PhD in anthropology, by the way, so I'd been through the training and took even astronomy. And when I started showing some issues, the person couldn't articulate sentences. And then what she did is she went into the other room, pulled the David Bowie vinyl that has a Space Oddity song, and then she had to dance to that at least 2 or 3 times to kind of feel space come back. Space come back. So we know that, scientism is this kind of faith and fiction kind of type of storytelling. And here's, this is important. I hope the sound is good. And what we're trying to do here is that we need to move forward from this. People have proven that there's no curve. Right? There's so many other things to do, and we need to explain to a lot of people how this works. How is it that they're being fooled? They don't really want to look into it. Some people don't care. Some people say it doesn't matter either way. After you show them that there's so many problems with the globe, they'll say, I don't care. I have so many issues I have to deal with life. And that's reasonable. But the people who know, I think we need to come together and start doing the hard work, which is pulling off the threads of transhuman eugenics, this apparatus, this parasitical apparatus from academia, figure out all its tentacles, how it spreads, because we know that they're basically rapists. At the very least, if you're gonna use an euphemism for what they're doing, what they do is way more nefarious, right? So what I like to show you here is a set of 3 things that people said, Jaron, Paul on the Plane, and Iro, that give you perhaps idea of how we can move forward. What is it that's missing? What is it that we need to teach? What is it that we need to understand so we can tell the people in the world in the future or now that you have to prove things by going into the world and showing them. You can't just go by theories. Theories have to be confirmed through observations, and that you should question them, but everyone, to make sure where they are, where they live, they need to go out and try to make some observations, right? Because the ball does have a geometry. A lot of people try to avoid this, and then they come out and say that the reason, this is one of the other things, how doublethink works. Like, they tell you that the reason you cannot find a curvature and you see too far is that the light is bending with gravity around the ball and making everything look flat. Yeah, that's come out. They have to come up with new stuff. And then a scientist contacted me and said, look at the history of refraction. Here are the textbooks on refraction. What's happening is that the light's bending the other way for most of the time. This is 100 years of refraction science that they're looking at, making observations whole day, taking temperature and pressure, humidity in the air, and looking how it changes. The light doesn't bend down almost ever. It's very rare and does. Yeah. So for most of the day, it's bending the other way. So it's like, is that a shot in the foot? But we need to just pay attention here to some of these messages that I selected from some of my research. Okay. So first is Jaron.
They should have practical, real-world examples and experiments and tests that these children are doing. Mm-hmm. If you really lived on this spinning globe, then there would be tests that every child would do. This had to be their biggest fear. Their biggest fear has to be the beginning of the questioning of where people live, because I don't know how you stop it.
So what do you think? Should children be taught how to go around and test the world and see what the world for what it really is? Or should we just tell them it's a ball and have them twist their heads over it? Because what we see in the psychology research that has been done with children who are being told what the world is that they cannot confirm, we see a lot of resistance, and then when they're told it's stupid to think it's not a ball, then they start conforming and they start changing their drawings to try to fit it. But all of them in the very beginning, they said, how can somebody be upside down on the other side of this ball? How this ball is it spinning? And one of the things they find it fascinating is how in the ISS, they have a gravity simulator, right? They're in microgravity. And they have a gravity simulator. How does that gravity simulator work? Right? You know, the ball itself, where supposedly we are on the globe, it's spinning and has 1,000 miles an hour in the equator. And it has to make that big spin. And we know that centrifugal force, when you spin something, you throw a ball, a tennis ball, people have seen this with water, you spin it, the water goes away from the center. So anything that spins pulls things away. The ball doesn't do it because of gravity, they tell you. But how does the gravity simulator work? Or the gravity, whatever, anti-supergravity thing they do in the ISS? It's a centrifuge. So look at the twist of the doublethink. They simulate gravity with a thing, supposedly that spins, so the gravity they simulate is being pulled against with their centrifugal force. Is the gravity. And at the same time, that's their gravity simulator, but at the same time, the ball is spinning, so you don't get the centrifugal force. Somehow you get the gravity, but they simulate the gravity with the centrifuge. Okay. And let's take a look at what Iru says. And this, I mean, Iru has done some incredible work. I think this stuff needs to be sort of a catalog. The thing is, like, there's so much stuff he's talked about that to go back and try to find things is difficult. This is from a conversation I had with him, and so he was showing me directly. And he can do that anytime. He's going to do this tonight. For sure, I don't know what he's going to say today. But let's see what he has to say here. And this is part of how, you know, do children have tests they can do? You know, do we teach them? We don't. We just tell them. But this is one possible option here.
Fíjate cómo esta sola fuente de luz, de golpe, se empieza a transformar en un círculo.
It's not Iru's real voice, by the way.
¿Se ve la realidad? Sí. Eso es anisotrofía. Es porque la fuente de luz está cercana y está atravesando capas o un medio que la frena y la disperse. Todo lo que se ve en el cielo nuestro se puede demostrar vía software, vía simulación en laboratorio, combinado con imágenes de la realidad. Y lo que ellos proclaman, no hay laboratorio que lo pueda comprobar.
Sí.
Básicamente.
how about that? Anybody? How about that? He's looking at these phenomena. They're clearly visible. He can simulate them in his environment, but he's putting a dome and he's putting a sun that's closer and smaller, and he's doing exactly what you see in nature. Is it funny? And what they claim with the ball, with the curving water around the ball holding to the center of mass and so on, they cannot prove in a laboratory. We can model these things. We can show that what we're observing matches reality. And there's more to it, because in the flat earth movement, you have people that say that the sun is so close, it's being rendered between the clouds. And because you can actually observe, there's images that show, clouds behind the sun and some clouds in front of the sun. So it looks like the sun is in the middle of the clouds. A lot of people have seen this kind of puzzling phenomenon. People have been wondering about it for a long time. But Ido he modeled this with the actual clouds, with the sun in the proper altitude, and he rendered it from the position of the observer. So you have a plane with the sun really, above, going in a straight line. And I don't know if he's going to show this tonight, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering it, but from the perception of the observer, the sun seems to be rendered in between the clouds. Even in Ido simulation matches reality so well, it's amazing. Okay, so we need to more people to understand how these things are put together, and then we need to have people. Well, the problem is because with NASA you're dealing with a production company. They're actors. Most of them are actors. So, and they're fed lines, and we know because they repeat themselves over and over and over and over again. So, I mean, they wouldn't be able to debate Ido. They wouldn't have the technical knowledge. When the Martian. There was another story when The Martian came out, this movie, the Bolden, the guy from NASA, was crying how beautiful it was, and how good it was, and how perfect it was, and how precise it was. It's not because NASA is part of Hollywood, is essentially the same thing. But in the Mars landing of Curiosity landing, anybody can see that. The actor who's pretending he's the director there, he can barely answer any questions. He doesn't have any questions he can answer. Not even about the compression of the artifacts of the... And they're all celebrating and running around because that's part of the dramatic storytelling apparatus of the show that people are watching. They get all this expectation. If you follow the Chandrayaan mission, the failed Indian mission, that even Brad Pitt said that he was in JPL, because Brad Pitt's talking to the International Space Station, and he went to the JPL because he did his start in a space movie, so he goes in NASA. And he was at JPL when the Indians are doing their thing, and he said the JPL was actually controlling them. He said JPL was assisting them. Right? And people think, oh, there's all these independent space agencies. They don't understand that McDonald's is in China and in Japan. It's still McDonald's. Right? It's franchising. It's how it works. It is exactly how it worked with India. They show you CGI cartoons. In the case of India, it was ridiculous. The kind of stuff they're showing. It was like, is this Atari from the 80s? People are like, how is it possible? They should be showing amazing pictures from inside the ship, doing all kinds of stuff, but they just show you this fake stuff. And people believe it. They had kids there who had won a space quiz. They were the winners of the trivia from space. So you get a bunch of kids to memorize a bunch of trivia, test them, select the ones that did better. And these kids refused to accept that the mission had failed. And then the Indians went on and on to explain how they had actually succeeded because they managed to do all the 98 steps out of 100. So they did it. They did most of it, the vast majority. So they couldn't have failed, even though the thing never landed, never see any footage, and so on and so forth. They failed, right? They did fail. But you see just the power of the will to believe and how strong it is, the brainwashing apparatus, and how people love the idea of space. They're never going to go there. They're never going to fly anywhere. And it has a lot to do with pride, nationalist pride. Let's hear Paul for a second here.
What we have all been told is going on doesn't reconcile with reality from our perspectives, and so that's why we start questioning. And I think that's the biggest problem. When I first came to this subject of the Earth being potentially not being what we are told it is, the first thing that hit my mind was, what about all these pictures we have from space?
Which is what a lot of people say. And that basically is how he starts his journey. He's like, well, let me see these pictures from space. And I was just looking at NASA databases the other day to get some of their Hollywood posters because they're just so playful. they make these Hollywood-looking posters. You should take a look at it. It's kind of ridiculous. But I look into their database, their supposed database, and you try to look into their satellite images and different things. It's basically all CGI. And they don't even tell you it's a photograph. They don't tell you. They say it's an image, it's a composite. They have all kinds of things that they say different instruments have to be put together in this really difficult way, and they give you this kind of, and people believe it. So it's science. Science works like that. You get the instruments, they get the measurements, and then they put it together. But it really is reality. And anthropologists are not that naive to believe this, because you have science studies anthropology since the 70s, when Bruno Latour did field work inside the Crick's laboratory, I think, looking at DNA, and basically uncovered it as being sort of a ruse, when they're just making stuff up from the complexity that they were looking at, and they try to reduce it all the time. And it's one of the things that science does, is reducing everything, because they've been caught in this eugenicist, reductionist mathematical paradigm. They think reality is the lack of complexity, that science is reducing everything to some sort of single formula, right? And here, what got me into this, sorry for this, is that these tensions that we see if you're somebody who's trying to honestly represent people, and which we learn from academic research with the human subjects. I did field work in northern Scotland, Shetland, with people, so I was going to be representing people and talking to people. I had over 40 interviews. I lived there for 2 years in the community, and I couldn't just go there as a university student without this control, making sure I say, you know what I'm going to do with this. You got to see what I'm going to do with this. You can have the final word if you don't like what I say. I'm not going to portray you in a way you don't want to be portrayed. Right? It's not what I'm after. Right? But what we see with this movement is that the media shows up particularly to attack people. They don't want to understand them. And it's a kind of discrimination it's just like racism, but it's also racism that's anti-religious, anti-immigrant, all sorts of people who might be different. So in this case, it's a crusade against people who happen to have a different cosmology, because it pokes a hole into the whole science fiction mythology that people chose to love. Right? So we see this pattern of misrepresentation, and National Geographic is one of the most extreme. And people have learned to associate National Geographic with accuracy. And one day, actually, at the University of Utah, I made a mistake of bringing up National Geographic to one of our archaeologists, who is this Mesoamerican archaeologist looking at the Olmec archaeology. And I said, oh yeah, I saw the picture in National Geographic. He went on a rant about how National Geographic is trash. I shouldn't even look at it. The way they write their stuff, how it's all just basically propaganda. That was in the States, in university. So we know that media is controlled by a few companies, since Chomsky's book, Herman and Chomsky's book, Manufacturing Consenting in 1988, started kind of this exposure of the whole thing. And they go deep into it. You should take a look. But every scholar knows about this book who's looking at anything, politics and history of the world. Can't avoid it. And what we see here is that in this Kool-Aid sort of soda pop that is space, these are some of the things they're also helping to propel it into cultural and larger kind of public consciousness, if you will. Through the media production of space, you have it catches on people's technological cult kind of mentality. They want gadgets, new ones, and, this gadget, that gadget, which kind of seeps into this is how they shot themselves in the foot with the flat earth. Because we're starting to get these better cameras and everything, and they didn't know that people were going to use them to make observations. So it's kind of a technological revolution, but the media is not really going to tell you this. It's basically people who said, okay, it's a ball. I know it's a ball. I'm going to prove it. Then they don't come back. And it's a story that repeats itself over and over and over and over again. It doesn't matter if you're religious, what is it, the denomination. The people say, okay, I don't care if you're Christian, if you're this or that. You tell me it's not a ball, okay, I'm going to check for myself. You see so many examples of this. For instance, Alex Michael, the flat earth man, in south of Spain where he lives, he's from Brighton, but he lives in south of Spain. What he did is that he started making observations from the coast, and he was seeing Mallorca and Minorca and the islands, the Baleares Islands there, from the coast. And he took the measurements like, it's not possible. Shouldn't be there. That's it. It's over. You're not going to convince that guy that's a ball. It's just not going to happen after. He went for himself and proved he's not. Like I was just watching the other night, I was telling Jaron last night, some guy filmed sprites, which are these high elevation electrical events in high altitude, like 100 kilometers, from 400 kilometers away, right? And that also shows that there should be a curvature there. You shouldn't be able to see all this stuff. But, it's geometry. If you got space, you got video games, and you got films, they can show you space. You have gravity. If you want, you latch onto it. You spend weeks and weeks and weeks watching sci-fi, and you love it. You get totally enthralled. And what we see here is all these connections, right? We know this. For flat earthers, this is just something to think about. We know all these things are connected, but the news is a culprit here because it gives legitimacy to what is being invented in the realm of video games and space and NASA. So by coming out in the news with a lot of authority, say the scientists are doing this and that, and we know that they are also misrepresenting science. Sometimes there's so many problems with communication because journalism is not fact-making. There's people writing something. And these are people that have biases, that have connections, that have jobs. It cannot be understood as no anthropologist, no first-year anthropologist is ever going to take the media for granted for what they're saying without considering that they work somewhere and somebody's paying the bills, there's advertisers. Everybody talks about this. Pierre Bourdieu talked about this on his book On Television. I was just reading a couple of days ago online. So it's just common knowledge. That's why I'm not afraid to talk about it as an anthropologist. I don't think that people can't even say anything about it. It makes perfect sense to be looking into these tensions between cosmologies, of course. And what we see now, what has been exposed, like I said, through Jeffrey Epstein, is the eugenics transhumanist apparatus and how they're buying people using children for sex and selling them. And these are people who are buying all these scholars in Harvard, like Steven Pinker is one of these celebrated genius, so-called imbeciles, in my opinion. So you get a lot of these guys, right? They write these big books and they select from, and this is kind of how it works. People don't deconstruct textbooks. It's something I've been doing for 15 years more. Like science textbooks, they're put together by somebody who wants you to have certain kinds of facts. Obviously, they're filtering some other things out. And for the scholars, the people that write these big books, so-called, what I call kind of big books, is for different reasons, because biblion, megon, kakon. It's like a Greek saying a big book is a big piece of crap. It's Kalimachean aesthetics, the idea that you don't need so much to say. You can say something more elegant and in smaller way, in a more condensed way. But what you get is that these guys, they have a simplistic idea. So it's like guns, germs, and steel. Like here in Holland, they teach this in school. It's amazing. Like, no anthropologist takes this seriously. It's trash. Jared Diamond has this book, Guns, Germs, and Steel. It's celebrated. It's got a Pulitzer Prize. You do not find an anthropologist that thinks it's worth anything. But that's pushed everywhere. And the way it's put together is that he has a simplistic little reductionistic formula, and it goes around grabbing examples, it fits them in. Procrustean bed. Procrustes was this character in mythology who was making people fit his bed. He was stretching them to make them fit his bed, doing violence to them to make them fit. It's kind of what you have with this, because it's good money making. You get a publisher to promote that kind of book as some real serious history, and what it is that it supports this dominant eugenicist colonialist apparatus. So the people who do this kind of work of critiquing the stuff that makes up the dominant mainstream cosmology in academia, they're buried in bubbles within academia now, because it's completely taken over by transhumanist funding. Like, we know this. Now, how does NASA do it? Probably we should end with this because we have only 8 minutes. And it's how they program the future for us. And here I'd just like to show you what they say about inspiration. Here I just selected some of the logics that they use, and I kind of brought them to us in this way. They talk about inspiration, so they have to repeat that many times. It's all about America's leadership in space. It's this myth of science, exploration, technology. They say that the Apollo program was a revolution. There was a stunning demonstration that it demonstrates there was a fuel to the fire of the American consciousness, right? And, and they're going to show now in the future, they're going to go to the moon again to show the power of a unified purpose. And of course, they know that Apollo is all about catching the early young generations with this inspiration idea that makes them work and work and work for the country, right? Makes everybody more productive. Janus talked about this as NASA being a jobs program. Makes a lot of sense, right? And they are so good that they want to extend their presence to the farthest corners of the universe. Because they touch every aspect of our lives with anything they do. It's part of the myth. Anything NASA does, they're doing for the best of everybody. And I'm not sure you've seen it. They had Nestle did some research in the ISS to research the perfect cappuccino bubble. Because that's very important. That's in the European Space Agency website in the last month or so. Right? She talks, that's the perfect bubble, she said. It's amazing. And this is what they do. This is NASA. Like they draw on these ideas from the collective, sort of the Jungian, Freudian sort of archetypes. That's why they get involved in baseball and Hollywood. And what we see here is that you even have this pyramidal kind of staircase thing going on. They have kind of a pyramid going on here. And I mean, some people over there would say, you know, that might be the dome. You see that people have represented. They can tell you, sometimes people say that they can tell you the truth in what they're showing you. Here, of course, they even have these baseball cards for the astronauts because they want to promote them as these icons, as idols, as heroes that in American world, when you go there, when I got there, all my friends had these collectible cards and rookie cards and stuff, like Michael Jordan rookie card. It's worth a lot of money. It's like, what? It's a card? They're all fascinated, had books and books of this stuff that they collect. So, and they know the statistics. Oh, this guy batted this much average, such a, who cares? Like, what, baseball? Anybody outside the States it's trash. Like, who can watch baseball? It's so boring. I mean, if you say that to an American, they're gonna, they go crazy. But some of them were woken up for the sports. Is baseball, who's ever gonna take the time to play that? It's actually, it's not that bad. But, okay, 6 minutes to go. We see it here, well, sorry, here, yeah, we took a look at that. So here we see, and then they continue, they give you all these blurbs. This is straight from NASA's website. Why are they doing this? More science. Moon is this treasure chest of science. Yeah? Apollo samples dramatically change the view of the solar system. You know they're taken from Antarctica, right? Anything they find changes dramatically everything. And then they tell you, as they told Iro, this geologist said, she was a teacher. I thought she was a student. I mean, she says, they teach you this today saying it all may completely change tomorrow. So we know science is changing. So that's your solid foundations. Okay, great. So, and they're just scratching the surface of knowledge by going to the moon. You know, they can take so much more money from this. It's like, this is just a tiny thing. We spend billions and billions and billions. We get, you know, we have a new story for the universe, but it's just scratching the surface. So you give us more money, we get another story. And then they're doing everything for everybody and people are starving. There's lots of people marginalized in poverty right now all around the world, but they're taking millions of dollars every day to present this story. And so the moon poles hold water, ice, and this is the one that's crazy here. If you look there, if you can see it, it says ice represents power, power represents fuel, and fuel equals science. No, you can't make that up. It's just kind of like, you know, it's written by marketeers and production company, but ice represents power on the moon that they think it's there, and it's tons, it's millions of tons they're going to access. It's power, it's fuel, it's science. That's what science is. It's not what science is. It's not really what knowledge is for Aboriginal indigenous people, for all over people all over the world before this technocratic kind of apparatus comes in and everything becomes about reducing things, turning them into resources, turning creatures into resources to be managed, turning lands and landscapes and plants into resources to be managed. That is something most indigenous people that still survive the onslaught of this so-called civilization are against. They don't believe animals are resources to be managed, right? So, and then they continue with this, and I'm not going to bother you with the whole thing because we only have 3 minutes, but they even tell you this. This is one. Let's finish with this because this is amazing. They say that we have to actually read it here. Exploration is in the DNA of our species, they say. the desire to discover and inhabit distant world, whether across earthly oceans or vast regions of space, it is critical to the continuation of our species. And this is what you're going to see here. This is transhumanism, perfect transhumanism. Right? Exploration is part of your DNA. The Earth is going to be destroyed anyway, so it's imperative that we move to other planets, and only they can do it. Right? It's critical to the continuation of our species that NASA goes somewhere else. And so we can have, they say, humanity must build a path to Earth-independent existence. It makes you wonder if they care so much about the Earth, right? They already given up on it. It's going to be destroyed, right? It's like that young, the teenagers show up on the UN and was crying, you know, we're heading to an extinction event. Everybody's going to, but it's inevitable extinction, but we're going to do something. It's okay, it's inevitable extinction. Let's all just die together, right? But they are telling us this, that they need to be doing this. They need to be going to, and they claim, of course, that their missions to the moon is sustainable. What's sustainable? They're from 1969 to 72, and then never again. And we look at their tent that they say is flying there, right? So what is sustainable about that? And now they say they destroy. Of course, if people looked into this, they found Don Pettit saying they destroyed the technology from the 60s, and it's a painful process to build it back up. So they have an actor actually saying this, and who sounds kind of like has some problems, cognitive issues, but he's supposedly a genius. It's part of the inversion that we see going back all the way to Darwin, to Kepler, for instance, whose Latin is so terrible, it's barely readable. And people think it's an amazing science fiction story he wrote, this dream, it's called Somnium. And the Latin is this, for somebody like me who knows ancient Latin and poetry from the ancients, compared to the stuff from the 17th century, the supposed genius is like, it's like, oh my goodness, what an idiot. But, I mean, there's nothing you can do about that, because if you read Cicero and Ovid and you look back, you look at these guys like, these guys are supposed to be smart. Okay. So here, yeah, of course, you give them, they have all these things. Oh, this is what they do. It's one of the things Jaron was talking about this the other day. This is an actual NASA expedition here. ISS, they drawing on Star Trek. There they have a Beatles cover. They're doing these posters all the time to promote themselves. And I'm here, let's just finish with what they show you for reality. They want you to believe this is real, and this is where you get a little test to go. We have 30 seconds. Let's take a look at this wonder of science technology, lifting off from the moon's surface, and how its panels, the integrity, the engineering integrity of this amazing piece of technology is guaranteed here. Let's take a look. That's the first one. Is the panels flap? Oh, are those panels flapping? Oh, that looks real. Oh, look at that. Oh, what's that? What's that thing that has a kind of prismatic thing? It looks like strings in different directions. I don't know. It's not. That's how it is on the moon. It's like just like that. And look at that panel. When the lunar lander is taking off, look at that panel. That's how it's supposed to work. It's how it's supposed to work. It flaps in the wind of the moon. The moon vacuous moon wind. Is what we're seeing here. It's amazing, it's so real. And of course, from the Earth with the remote control, if you wonder about that, they're pressing a button at NASA and making sure they do it in the right time so that they can follow this ship going up. Look at that. And you can show it many times. I showed this for people who believe the moon landings, which is amazing, and they were they didn't know what they were looking at. So yeah, are those panels flapping? So I'll leave you with that because the time is up. And thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the many presentations that we have from great people that I've admired over the years and got to learn and want to know more about. So thank you very much.
I know that there's some people in the room, or at least one or two, that are journalists, and we just need to ask you to be supportive of the event. That the actual OBA theatre do not they do not want any photography or filming inside the theatre from themselves. So obviously we're filming it because we're actually doing it on behalf of the actual the event. But if you're a journalist, we ask you to have respect. If anyone does an interview with the journalist and they are filming you, we would ask you to go outside of the building and hopefully not have the OBA in the background. The reason for it is that obviously the OBA and probably being associated with Flat Earth is something they don't want to do. So we want to be supportive of the event because we want to, possibly we may use it again, and we want the whole day to go without any hitch. I just want to mention about Paul. He's actually come over for a month. He's actually got family in Ireland, and when we actually asked him if he would like to speak at this convention, he was also talking to Robin about the UK. And we were trying to see if we could do this event 1 week after the other event because we thought it'd be good for certain speakers coming over from the pond, the other side of the pond, that they could piggyback quite easily. What it doesn't help is obviously there's people like yourselves that are going to try and go to 2 events. So what I'd like to do is that some of you in the UK and some of you here, well, all of you that are here today, I'd like to say a personal thank you to support the event because the event isn't to do with always to do with the presentations. It's actually to do with the actual getting us together. I mean, we had a couple of days in the campsite and we're having people that met for the first time. I mean, it's just amazing for me that when people are online, are keyboard warriors, all they want to do is talk about oh, what's the point of a convention? We don't gain anything more. There's nothing new to learn. One, that's rubbish. I mean, Rodrigo just done a fantastic presentation, as you all hopefully agree. And you owe me €10 for that. But basically, the convention is so much more. And like Karen here is putting on Flattoberfest, is it? Say it.
Flattoberfest.
So that's happening in a couple of weeks in America. We've obviously got Dallas happening in a couple of weeks, a couple of months after that, or 2 months from now. And these events there's a huge amount of work that you can probably imagine that goes into these, and the stress levels and the financial costs. And that's why we really want us to say thank you to you, really, for being here, because it really makes it worthwhile. Are you ready, Paul?
I think so.
Okay, I'm now going to hand over to Paul. If you can please give him a round of applause. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Unthinking respect for authority is the greatest enemy of truth. It's a quote that I think of often. My first 20 episodes of my podcast, I started with this quote. Thought it was really profound. A lot of what Rodrigo spoke about. You can take the quote, obviously, a couple of different ways. Obviously, there's context to consider. However, let's just take it at pure face value. Who wouldn't agree with this sentiment? Misplaced trust in anything could be a recipe for disaster, and I think we can all agree on that. So who said unthinking respect for authority is the greatest enemy of truth? Albert Einstein. Which I find extremely ironic, as we'll touch on a bit later. So my presentation here this morning is going to, the plan is I'm going to just kind of skim the surface of 7 topics that are, I feel, persistent in the overall conversation when it comes to this discussion of the shape of the world, and used often by defenders of a globular Earth, often as appeals to authority, unthinking respect for the perceived authority, that is. So this is not meant to be an exhaustive analysis on each topic whatsoever, but simply to give you a taste of what many on the globular Earth side of the conversation attempt to use as so-called proofs of a globular Earth, and why I think those arguments don't hold water. I'm running out of space up here. So this presentation, again, not intended to be evidence for and certainly not proof of the flat Earth, but more of a high-level analysis of alleged globe Earth proofs. What I found they are actually based on, and why I think they are pointless for anyone to try and defend a globular Earth theory. Hence why I call them gobbledygook. I'm not sure if it's a term that is used on this side of the Atlantic Ocean, but I use it often in the States when I refer to gibberish, and I think the origin is referring to the sound a turkey makes. So, before we dive into these 7 topics, I kind of felt compelled in any situation like this to make a few requests based on my experience in seeing how the media handles these sort of gatherings or these sort of events. So if you're seated in this auditorium and you're a journalist and you're covering this event, I'm not sure there are any in here or not, but first off, we would appreciate if you would not make any reference to or even mention the Flat Earth Society. Personally, I'm not associated with this group, and I do not believe anyone here is either. When we see articles covering events such as this, the Flat Earth Society is often mentioned, and it just reveals how lazy the journalism was, as Rodrigo mentioned. Somebody simply Googled Flat Earth and looked at the few links at the top of their search engine results, and this is what they come up with. So we believe the Flat Earth Society is controlled opposition. If you don't know what that means, look that up. I think they mix a little bit of truth in with a portion of outlandish claims, so that at first glance you're compelled to dismiss the entire idea quickly, all the while thinking you've actually done some research. Trust me, you haven't. We know that if you spend time actually researching this topic, you'll be sucked in. So the idea is that you Google Flat Earth, end up on the Flat Earth Society page, and see something that you will laugh and move on quickly. Secondly, there's no one here that believes that we live on a pancake or a pizza floating in space, so please do not include these sort of images in your article because it's disingenuous and does not represent our findings or beliefs in the least. Next, no one here believes the Earth is moving upward at 9.8 meters per second squared, which causes us to experience something akin to gravity. We do not believe the Earth is moving in any way, shape, or form, period, paragraph. And finally, please stop asking, where's the edge? We believe the world's oceans are surrounded by Antarctica, which is like the shoreline of a lake. So when I get that question, I usually respond, can you fall off a lake? So please do not, of course you can, so please stop asking if you can fall off the Earth. And do yourself and all of us a favor and research the Antarctic Treaty. You'll begin to understand why we all aren't piling in a boat this weekend and heading to Antarctica to see what lies beyond. We aren't able to travel independently below the 60th parallel and must not only have our own government's permission, but all of the permission of the governments that have land claims in Antarctica. There are no motorized vehicles allowed, no sled dogs, and you have to bag your own urine and feces. The Antarctic Treaty alone should cause you to question the motives of the world's governments if you dare to look into it. And one final point, while I'm on the subject of Antarctica, no, we are not planning a cruise there next year. If you Google Flat Earth Cruise, you still come up with hundreds of headlines making that claim, and that was never the plan. One media outlet got it flat out wrong, and hundreds of other media outlets simply copied that story and didn't practice any due diligence and just ran with it. All that being said, if you are a journalist attending this convention, first of all, thank you for being here. We hope you represent the organizers, the speakers, and attendees respectfully, and most importantly, we hope you represent them accurately. My rant is over. All right, let's get going. As I mentioned previously, going to touch on 7 topics that are persistent in the flat Earth versus globe Earth conversation used by defenders of the globular Earth with unthinking respect for authority. And here they are. Number 1, the Earth is a pear. Number 2, radius, or R, of the Earth. Distance to the Sun, the shrinking Sun, Coriolis effect, gravity, and gas pressure. All right, number 1. When it comes to the shape of our world, the idea that the Earth is not being a perfect sphere comes up often. Officially, we are told the Earth is an oblate spheroid, meaning it is a bit wider than it is taller, somewhere between 13 and 20 miles wider than it is taller, in fact. Therefore, difficult to tell by distant observation of the Earth's oblateness. Satellites, we're told, have to be about 22,000 miles away in order to see the entire disk at one time. Then we're faced with claims such as this meme, which suggests that if you take the highest resolution pictures that we get of the Earth, 121 megapixel files, 40 megabytes, from the Japanese weather satellite, the Himawari, and measure down to the individual pixel count and compare the width and height of the Earth, that it measures wider than it is taller, supporting the notion that the Earth is not a perfect sphere, but an oblate spheroid. There are 121 million pixels in these images. So I want to give thanks to moon researcher Dave Marsh, maybe you're familiar with him, He uses the same technique with special commercial software to measure the angular size of the moon using pixel width. And we verified that this meme is, in fact, correct in its measurements of the image of the Earth, and it seems to support the notion that the difference in the width and height of the disk is about 0.3%, which aligns with the WGS-84 model of the Earth, so somewhere around 13 to 20 miles wider than it is taller. So point for the globe, right? Well, not so fast. The problem is that the absolute widest point of the highest resolution images that we get are precisely the same number of pixels from the top of the image that it is to the bottom, meaning the absolute widest point of the Earth in these 120 million pixels is exactly midway between the north and south poles, directly on the equator. Let me restate that differently just to make sure you're getting this. The same measurements used to prove the Earth's oblateness confirm that the Earth's absolute widest point is straight through the center of the circle, or the equator. Do you guys see a problem with this? Let me play a short clip. Hopefully this will jog your memory. There's it. Oh, don't have any audio. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm at 100% volume. Well, luckily the words are on the screen. I've got a couple other videos, so it's going to be important that we get the audio going for this. So this is Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about how the Earth is actually wider below the equator than it is above. That's what he states. And that's where he comes up with his pear-shapedness, is what he calls it. Okay? So it's slightly wider below the equator than it is above the equator, which is where his pear-shapedness comes from. So those high-resolution images of the Earth, which we are told are photographs of our world from 22,000 miles away, can be used to verify that the Earth is oblate, but they essentially debunk, then, the world's most famous and well-known astrophysicist, Neil deGrasse Tyson, looked at as one of the foremost authorities on our universe by the general public, who says the Earth is wider below the equator than it is above. So let's talk about the world-renowned astrophysicist for a moment. To be fair, Neil is also known for his award-winning acting. Here's a list of his accomplishments from the Internet Movie Database. Did you know he's been nominated for Emmys and Grammys? And even was a Critics' Choice Television Award winner. We'll be picking on Neil quite a bit more this morning, so stay tuned for that. On a side note, regarding the Himawari images, they aren't really photographs anyway. As I've demonstrated previously in my Faking Space video series, in case you've not seen it, fakingspace.net, they are available free to stream or download directly from the website. What we found is that the weather patterns we see in the Himawari images are from combined local Doppler and local Doppler radar feeds and over land, and climate simulation weather patterns over the ocean. And software is used to wrap it around the Blue Marble Dataset 2.0 from NASA illustrator Robert Simon back in 2002. So it states right on the FTP file server, the Himawari images, that the underlying land in the images is from the Blue Marble dataset from 2002. Further, anyone can do a quick forensic analysis of any of the images that were given every 10 minutes from the Himawari and see that they contain no noise and no ambient light, which absolutely must be present if these are real photographs. And then finally, speaking of Dave Marsh again, I wanted to mention this, if you haven't had a chance to see what he presented in the at the UK conference 2 weeks ago, which I thought was fascinating. He's calculating the angular size of the moon using the same software that he did for the Himawari for me. And he's done this nearly a dozen times now. And these are a handful of the photos that he's captured with his Nikon P1000, all consistently capturing the moon with a 2,000 millimeter focal length. And what Dave is observing is that over and over again, that the moon always measures smaller on the horizon than it does at its zenith. And as it heads away from the observer, it gets smaller and smaller. This is extremely strong evidence that the moon is smaller and closer than what we've been taught. So great work, Dave. So the world's most recognized astrophysicist, the Himawari, and the mainstream moon narrative all debunked in the same section. We're off to a good start. All right, we're going to move on to the radius, or R, of the Earth. The letter of the day, boys and girls, is the letter R. Maybe remember that from Sesame Street. Whether the Earth is a sphere or an oblate spheroid, it must have curvature. All Earth curve calculators used to indicate the hidden height of an object below the Earth's alleged curvature at given distances based on the observer's height, obviously, and the elevation of the object that's being observed. All require one essential piece of data in order to calculate the final result using geometry, and that is the radius of the Earth, or the R value. The R value is from the assumed center point of the globe, a location that no one has been to or can get to, it appears. The deepest hole ever dug into the Earth was approximately 8 miles. And that's about 3,950 miles short of where the alleged center of the Earth is. So the radius of the Earth has never been verified. Further, as we just established quite thoroughly, we're told the Earth isn't a perfect sphere anyway, it's oblate. This is a key point to understand, because if that were true, then the radius of the Earth would be unique for each observer and unique to the object that is being observed. There would not be one firm value of R for every observation. If the Earth is oblate, then there is no single value of R, therefore no set curvature, and otherwise an arbitrary or useless number. Now this becomes a big problem when you need an R value for things like Earth curve calculators. The most notorious, if you're not aware, most of you probably are, is the curve calculator created by Mick West on his metabunk.org website, which is favorited by proponents of a globular Earth. Last year, Mick West was taken to task by Nathan Oakley and Anthony Riley about this specific issue. I hope we've got the audio sorted here. The R value used in this, in his very popular Earth curve calculator, and the audio that was captured by the YouTube live stream was absolutely priceless. So let's see if we can give it a listen.
By saying that you've accepted that it's based on an assumption. Do you still maintain that position?
Well, it's the standard model. Sorry, the standard model has no scientific backing. It is an assumption, correct? Well, it's the standard model. Sorry, the standard model has no scientific evidence. You only assume a value of R. Correct, Mick? For crying out loud, man. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wish they had a video, it would have been classic. We just got the audio, but it was classic. So yeah, he admits it. The radius of Earth is only an assumption. And make sure we're on the right slide. Over the years, there have been many different assumptive values for the size of the Earth, varying country by country, all with different assumptions of R. And if one models R value, let's say, is 1,500 meters, even 1,500 meters more than the other, this would put the observer height, higher or lower, and manipulates the alleged curve between the 2 points. So, if each country's model comes up with a different assumptive value of R, there is no true R, one R value for the globe and the calculations derived from. And R is not only used for curve calculations, but also orbital distances of satellites from ground level. But as we'll see in a bit, it's used for calculating some very important distances within our solar system. But back quickly to Mick West. This is the same guy who called out Neil deGrasse Tyson, in fact, about how high you have to be to see the Earth's curvature. Did you guys see this?
not only that, they make sure to photograph him standing there with a really wide-angle lens, which curves horizontal lines. So in the photo, you see this curvature of Earth's surface, and he said, wow, he's in space, look at that. No, he's not. At that height, you don't see the curvature of the Earth if you are 2 millimeters above this beach ball. You just don't. That stuff is flat.
It's some pretty high production value, you know, all that stuff. Like Rodrigo was talking about, I mean, this is the world's a stage, and this is, you know, high, you know, the emotion that you get from watching him jump, you know, I mean, it's powerful stuff. But then you go on metabug.org, you know, Mick West's website, and he calls out Neil and says, you know, we can observe curvature as low as 45,000 feet. So he flat out says the world's leading, you know, astrophysicist is flat out wrong. You know, I mean, I find the double speak here, you know, nothing reconciles. You know, if this were all true, it would all reconcile. But, you know, obviously we got to mention that there are many videos online, if I'm sure many people have seen that, of high altitude balloon footage in excess of, you know, way above 100,000 feet, showing no curves, as long as you're using a rectilinear lens, which produces little to no barrel distortion, or the so-called fish-eye effect. So I have to say, Neil, we're probably with you on this one. Unthinking respect for authority, again, is the greatest enemy of truth. So let's move on to number 3. The distance to the sun. And we had a little bit of a delay, so I'm running late here. For those of you who heard my story, I started my truth journey investigating the images of the Earth from space, which led me to the production of my Fake in Space video series, where I offer a forensic analysis of the images and show the anomalies, the lack of continuity, again, lack of reconciliation, chicanery, in other words, of the World Space Agencies trying to pass off CGI as real photographs. But after going down that rabbit hole, so to speak, I dived more into space topics such as the distance to the stars, how that's derived, other planets, and our sun. And what I found was, when it came to these most important topics, essential to modeling our world, our solar system, the galaxy, you know, the universe, etc., it was all assumptive based. So the bottom line for me was, you know, so-called scientists who, you know, worked out how this all works appear to use a logical fallacy called circular reasoning. And that's how they make all the math to work out. When the math works out, then it must be true, right? I mean, that's what we're told. And that's the deception. This method became really obvious to me when I looked into how they calculated the distance from the Earth to the sun. And first off, the distance to the sun has been calculated to be quite different over the centuries, showing that the so-called scientific community had to keep working on the assumptions that they were making and working out the math to make sure that it all lined up. NASA's astronomical figures sound perfectly precise, but heliocentrists have historically been notorious for regularly and drastically changing the numbers to suit their various models. For instance, in his time, Nicholas Copernicus calculated the sun's distance to be about 3.3 million miles away. The next century, Johannes Kepler decided it was about 12.3 million. Isaac Newton was once quoted as saying, "It matters not whether we reckon it 28 or 54 million miles, for either would do just as well." That's pretty scientific. Benjamin Martin calculated between 81 and 82 million. Thomas Dilworth, 93.7. John Hind, 95.2, positively 95.2. And Benjamin Gould said more than 96 million. And then the one that looked like the most was Christian Meyer. He said that's about 104 million. Quoting from Thomas Winship's book, Zetetic Cosmogony, if I can say that, 1899, as the sun, according to science, may be anything from 3 to 104 million miles away, there is plenty of space to choose from. It is like the showman and the child. You pay your money for various astronomical works, and you take your choice as to what distance you wish the sun to be. And if you're a modest person, you just go in for a few million. But if you wish to be very scientific and be mathematically certain of your figures, then I advise you to make your choice somewhere around 100 million. You will at least have plenty of space to retreat into should the next calculation be against the figures of your choice. You can always add a few million, you know, here and there to keep up with the times, or take off as many as you may be required to adjust the distance to the very latest accurate column of figures. Talk about ridicule. The whole of modern astronomy is like a farcical comedy full of surprises. One never knows what monstrous or ludicrous absurdity may come forth next. You must not apply the ordinary rules of common sense to astronomical guesswork. No, the thing would absolutely fall to pieces if you did. So in a nutshell, this is how they calculate the distance from the Earth to the Sun. Scientists observed Venus transiting the Sun. Now, the transits of Venus are very, very rare. They occur in a pattern that repeats every 243 years, with pairs of transits 8 years apart, separated by gaps of 121 and 105 years. So on average, about every 113 years. The next one, coincidentally, will be in the year 2117. So they determined the distance from Venus to the Sun by using the speed and the size of Venus's orbit around the Sun. Okay? They assumed Venus and the Earth to be of the same size. That was the first assumption they made. And then they were able to determine the distance of Venus to the Sun by determining the speed and size of Venus's orbit around the Sun. Does that compute? Because that's the circular reference again. So then they used that data to determine that Venus's distance to the Sun was about 3/4 of the distance of the Earth to the Sun because of the size of the Sun. But they calculated the size of the Sun based on the distance of the Earth to the Sun. Circular references abound. And the underlying data that they used to base all these calculations was an assumption that the Earth is an oblate spheroid with a circumference based on their absolute 100% ironclad, measured and validated radius of the Earth. I recommend checking out Gerard Hickson's 1922 book, Kings Dethroned, if you have not read it, in which he breaks down methodically and irrefutably, in my opinion, how many assumptions were made in coming up with these astronomical distances between celestial bodies. If even one of these assumptions are slightly off, the entire model is going to be wrong. They cite Johannes Kepler's third law of orbital mechanics often. Kepler, who said that the Sun was 12 million miles away. But here's the kicker and where the deception is. You need to know either the size of the object or the distance to that object to figure out the other figure using geometry. But they calculate one using the other. It's completely a circular reference. No actual measurements have been or ever will be taken to validate either one. Quote, today's scientists have substituted mathematics for experiments, and they wander off through equation after equation and eventually build a structure which has no relation to reality. I think Nikola Tesla said it best. Now, I don't know if you guys saw this. The Sun might actually be bigger than we originally thought. What does that do to all the math? That we've been given, that we're told proves the cosmos. What you'll find as you dig in is that the universe is an assumptive-based model built on a mathematical construct that only works because of logical fallacies such as circular reasoning. There is no verification of any of the assumptions that are made, only explanations built to make up the pieces of the puzzle. And these assumptive figures that are worked out mathematically are taught to the world as fact. There is no true science behind any of it whatsoever. Again, the unthinking respect for authority is the greatest enemy of truth. All right, number 4, I'm going to try and move quickly through these. The shrinking sun. The staunch defenders of the globe think they are having a field day with those of us that do not accept the claim that our sun is 93 million miles away, because they state that we don't see the sun change in angular size over the course of the day, and therefore it cannot be small and close. It must be huge and far away. Well, that argument that the sun's size does not change, therefore it's massive and far away, is an informal fallacy called a straw man. It is based on an assumption that the sun is a physical object with an actual and verifiable position, which obviously we just covered in point number 3. The globe defender belief is that the sun is 93 million miles away. Light travels 186,000 miles per second. Therefore, the light we are receiving from the sun originated from the sun 8 minutes ago. We're not seeing the actual sun in the sky. We're seeing an apparent sun. This is also the argument they use to explain sunsets, that the apparent sun is seen by us as setting, but the real sun is already below the horizon due to the distance of the sun and because of atmospheric refraction. So if we follow the logic, we're seeing an apparent, not actual sun, location of the sun. We can only measure the angular size of the sun from our location here on Earth. And that angular size would only be apparent, again, not actual, to the individual observer at their own unique location, and the horizon is also an apparent, not actual location too. So I think it bears repeating that the horizon is not an actual it's not an actual location. It's an apparent location where the sky meets and touches the land or water. So the horizon is different to each observer. The height of the observer and weather conditions obviously vary, and we have an apparent horizon. The horizon is not an actual location anyone can go, but defenders of the globe reify the horizon to be the solid leading edge of a spherical Earth, claiming that celestial objects going beyond that location are below your observer location, i.e. the sun. So in summary, if we can keep all of their arguments in line, the globe defender's argument would actually be broken down as, or their question would be, why don't we see the apparent size of the apparent sun change when looking at the apparent position of the sun disappearing at an apparent location of the horizon? I think everybody sees how silly that would be. Science will need to provide, first of all, evidence that the sun is a physical object at the distance that they say it is, and the size that they claim it is. And as we've discussed already, this has not happened and will not happen. Shifting gears to the moon real quickly. Attempts to measure the distance of the Earth to the moon are common amongst the defenders of the globe as well. They use an assumed curved Earth, of course, based on the assumptive arm value to calculate their angles, using two different locations and solving for the leading edge of a triangle using geometry. They have to use a known size of the moon to do so, what mainstream science maintains to be about 2,000 miles in diameter, and they come up with 238,000 miles of distance. However, let's give them all that and assume that all that is true. Then the same must hold true for the distance of the Earth to the sun, because the sun and the moon are identical size. So you would have to deduce that the sun is the same distance as the moon. It's only when the assumed size of the sun is added to the calculation. 864,000 miles is what we're told. So the math cranks out 93 million miles. But as I've already covered, they came up with the size of the sun based on the distance to the sun using circular reasoning. No wonder the math always works. Just remember this, you need the distance to get the size, or you need the size to get the distance. They have neither, so they use circular reasoning to build a mathematical construct. And thinking respect for authority will always be the greatest enemy of truth. All right, we're going to move on to number 5, Coriolis effect. We're told that the Earth spins on its axis approximately every 24 hours. This is why we have day and night, right? Well, we can model the day and night on a flat model of the Earth. So what else is there? Well, the defender of the globe will say, you idiot, didn't you go to school? You must have flunked science, and you forgot about the Coriolis effect, which proves that the Earth is spinning. The Coriolis effect describes the pattern of deflection, here's the definition, taken by objects not firmly connected to the ground as they travel long distance around and above the Earth. The Coriolis effect is responsible for many large-scale weather patterns. It's also why Foucault's pendulum does this, we're told. The pendulum is set in motion very carefully to avoid introducing any sideways motion, usually by tying it back with a thread of cotton and slowly burning the end of it with a candle. Oddly, it will then appear to change its direction and swing over time without any outside input. Of course, it's actually with the Earth that is spinning or rotating underneath the pendulum, which is why it continues to swing in the same plane relative to the rest of the universe. So that's how it works. So let's dive into this effect called Coriolis, which allegedly is evidence that the Earth is spinning on its axis. For there to be a Coriolis effect, you must have two reference frames: the Earth, a non-inertial rotating reference, and then the air, or anything not attached to the Earth, an inertial, non-rotating reference. So the Coriolis effect can be demonstrated, as you can see here, by throwing a ball while on a rotating roundabout or merry-go-round, etc. The person sitting on the rotating frame of reference is attached to the first reference frame, which is spinning. When the person throws the ball travels in a straight line, leaving the first reference frame and going into the second reference frame, which is the non-inertial reference frame. Although the ball is moving in a straight line, it appears to deflect or curve in relation to the observer, who is in the first frame of reference. Now, the following are example observations that we are told are caused by the spin of the Earth, and otherwise prove to us that the Earth is spinning. Foucault's pendulum, hurricanes, typhoons, toilet water, I've been told, because it goes this way, in parts of the world, and then it goes this way in the other parts of the world. And then footballs are also affected by Coriolis.
Are you doing that? Other football tweet. What other
about the,
football
was it the
tweet?
Bengals? I forgot who it was about a year ago.
Yeah.
There's in overtime, after there was the exchange of balls, so now it's sudden death overtime. They kick a field goal from 50 yards, of course, as it must be, and 40 yards out plus the 10 plus the 9 distance. So it's like 52-yard field goal, and there it was. And if there's tense, right? Everybody's silent, and the ball comes up, and it careens off the left upright and goes in for the win.
Wow.
And I said,
I remember this.
that's what I'm saying.
I remember this
That's
tweet.
what I'm saying. So then I said, wait, the angle of this, how long is it? So I checked the stadium, its configuration, what's longitude and latitude, and I said, I did a quick calculation, and I tweeted, the winning field goal in that game was aided by a 1/3 of an inch deflection to the right from Earth's rotation.
That is the nerdiest tweet I've ever heard in my life.
So it's good to know that kick footballs are susceptible to the Earth's spin, but airplanes, helicopters, drones, hot air balloons are not. If the Coriolis effect with respect to the Earth is real, take, for example, a commercial flight from Charlotte, North Carolina to Los Angeles, California. They both sit about 35 degrees north latitude, where the Earth is allegedly spinning at 860 miles per hour. When the plane takes off and travels 500 miles per hour to the west, plus you add in the rotation of the Earth coming towards the plane at 860 miles an hour, that's about 1,360 miles per hour that the plane would be covering. It would be a very significant amount of ground in a very short period of time. The flight would be something like 90 minutes to cover that distance. But in reality, the flight takes approximately 4 hours. And the flight time is generally the same in both directions, where the plane would have to fly considerably faster east than it would to the west because Charlotte is traveling 860 miles per hour away from the plane once it left the ground in LA. And it left the first frame of reference and entered the second frame. In actuality, the only reason there's a slight difference in flight time is because generally planes flying west are headed into the wind and have tailwinds when they're heading east. So their average speeds in each direction will vary. And then what about planes heading north to south and vice versa? Think about that one for a while. The only way similar flight times in all geographic directions are possible on a spinning globe is if the atmosphere is stuck to the rotating globe, which is what we are taught, exactly that. But this asserts that there's only one reference frame, not the two reference frames that are absolutely vital for Coriolis to even be considered. So mainstream science's own admission is that there is no Earth-based Coriolis possible. When you Google, why can't I feel the Earth, spinning, why can't I feel it, chasing the sun and orbiting around the sun, you get this explanation. The atmosphere is stuck to the Earth. How convenient. So when it comes to pendulums, hurricanes, typhoons, toilet water, and kicked footballs, the Coriolis effect is there to explain certain phenomena as proofs of the Earth is spinning, but generally it does not affect things like missiles, bullets, airplanes. It does warrant pointing out, obviously, that snipers, long-range missile operators, and the like reportedly do not account for the spin of the Earth, or curve for that matter. We have many, ex-military personnel, long-range gunners, etc., who have stated plainly that there's only two dials on their scopes, one for elevation and one to adjust for the wind. There is no adjustment for latitude or direction, north, south, east, west, which would need to be factored in when determining the speed of the projectile and its relation to the Earth spinning underneath it when it left the gun and how long it was in the second frame of reference. Now, to hammer this point home, watch this demonstration of a gun fired straight up with the projectile in the air for almost 2 minutes, landing almost precisely where it was shot from. If the Coriolis effect were a real thing and the Earth was spinning, then this bullet should have landed approximately 21 miles away. And this video was edited slightly for time constraints. I would run too. I think this was a .50 caliber.
Yes. And it's 1 minute and 20 seconds, Okay. 1 minute.
They slowed down the sound there. It sounds like a helicopter.
You hear that? I heard it. You hear that, cabron? It's here really close. Behind us. Yeah, cabron. 150. 150. 150.
1 minute 50 seconds in the air, and it landed almost in the same spot.
I heard it. I told you the sound. Because I hear something spinning. Yeah, it's spinning. Let's go out. It's already 2 minutes.
All right, I think we've hammered that point home enough. So number 6, and I'm going to try and crank through these in 5 minutes. The number one proof of a globe that we are often presented with is obviously gravity, or the theory of. Apparently solves all the problems of the heliocentric model that those of us who question it bring to the table. Gravity is used to explain how trillions of gallons of ocean water can stay stuck to a spinning globe, how the air pressure system we enjoy here on Earth is kept from expanding into the ultra-low pressure of infinite, never-expanding space, and at the same time keeps the Earth and the Moon chasing the Sun perfectly in a corkscrew pattern at almost 500,000 miles per hour. But like most beliefs in globular models of the Earth, there's not just one accepted explanation. So Isaac Newton is credited as being the father of gravity. He gave us the world's Newton's universal law of gravitation. Whereas he described that all mass attracts other mass and can be calculated using this famous formula that he's credited with, where big G is Newton's universal constant of gravity. But here's the interesting thing. Newton didn't even mention this universal constant of gravity, or G, in his famous 1687 publication, Principia Mathematica, in which he publishes his major work, including Newton's 3 laws. In fact, there was no formula or equation published in the Principia for the universal law of gravitation. And as was the ways of the day, Newton described his newfound law using just words. And I quote, "The principle of universal gravitation, namely, that every particle of matter is attracted by or gravitates to every other particle of matter with a force inversely proportional to the squares of their distance." Again, quoting Newton himself. Newtonian gravity was said to be, and taught to, at least myself, as proven science. Most people today, when asked what gravity is, will explain to you that mass attracts mass. And the bigger the mass, the more the attractive force, as we'll see in this clip in a few moments. When we're told that this was proven science, it implies the empirical scientific method was used. So we apparently observe the natural phenomena of mass attracting mass. The cause of this observed effect, we are told, is due to the mass of the object, which leaves us with an hypothesis that would state, if mass, then mass attracts mass. And this is pseudoscience. Effects cannot be the cause in the scientific method. This is called, again, circular reasoning. But wait, globular Earth proponents have a lifeline for gravity. Newtonian gravity isn't the only accepted explanation for gravity anymore, where we are told it's not even an actual force. But you can think of it as a force. As George Musser, contributing editor for Scientific American magazine, said recently in an interview. He said, gravity isn't a force, but you can think of it as a force. And this is why I call it gobbledygook. Albert Einstein's theory is a concept only and can never be seen or measured. So Newton's law of gravitation is often interchanged with Einstein's when working out a physical force. You can work out the trajectory of throwing a ball and see it and test it with Newton's laws, but you can't with Einstein's. Without G, there's no physical force to be able to deal with. This asserts that even when something is at rest, like a cup on a table, it's still experiencing force. Einstein's theory of general relativity has emerged as the consensus of what gravity actually is, the bending of the conceptual medium of space-time, giving rise to a pseudo-force called gravity. So let's let, again, the world's most recognized astrophysicist enlighten us all.
I'm telling you, gravity really is the curvature of space and time. That gets us the Big Bang and everything we've ever known and loved.
Space and time, but it's also based on mass, right? It's based on the amount of mass.
Any concentration of matter and energy will curve the fabric of space and time.
And the more mass,
and
the
the
more
movement
gravity.
of matter on that fabric of space and time, we call gravity. And I'm good with that.
Okay, but you seem a little oddly defensive about something that's scientific.
No, I'm just saying I'm good with it.
But you are, because you're kind of defending it.
No, you can say, well, why does matter...
Why do you need to know why?
No, why
That's what you're saying.
No, I'm saying, why does matter and energy curve the fabric of space and time? You can ask that.
Okay, why?
And I don't have an answer for that. I can say...
Newton was trying to describe the effect of gravity as a force we observe with a mathematical relationship in 3 dimensions, length, width, and height. Whereas Einstein superseded this with inventing the bending of a concept that can only exist in one's imagination. It manifests in 3 dimensions with the addition of the 4th imaginary dimension of time. The closest thing you'll find as far as demonstrations of Einstein's gravity is a trampoline with a bowling ball sitting on it, sagging in the middle. However, this is also demonstrating gravity as an actual force, and objects released on the trampoline obviously just sag straight to the bowling ball, and it's called science. But, unfortunately, sorry Newton and Einstein, you're soon to be replaced. There's a new kid on the block, black holes, which apparently are debunking both Newton and Einstein. And don't worry, we used to think the sun was only 3 million miles away, so, how foolish were we? Unthinking respect for authority is the greatest enemy of truth. All right. Going to do this in a minute. We are told that the air pressure in outer space is immeasurable, right? Mainstream science maintains that there's 2 differing air pressure systems existing next to each other without a physical barrier. So at sea level, we measure about 14.7 pounds per square inch, but once you're far enough away from Earth, the pressure drops down to way less than 1 pound per square inch, way less, in fact. It's estimated to be 1 × 10 to the negative 17 torr. Basically unmeasurable. Now, if we go to our college science textbooks to see how we define pressure, it says pressure is a force exerted by the substance per unit area on another substance. And here's the key line, which I've underlined. The pressure of a gas is the force that the gas exerts on the walls of its container. When you blow into a balloon, the balloon expands because the pressure of air molecules is greater on the inside of the balloon than on the outside. Pressure is a property which determines the direction in which mass flows. If the balloon is released, the air moves from a region of high pressure to a region of low pressure. Who better than a professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, explain it simply for us?
All right, let's try another pretty simple process. Let's just take a gas in some volume, V, and over here is going to be vacuum of equal volume, and we're going to remove the barrier. You know what's going to happen spontaneously, right? The gas is going to fill the available volume once it becomes available, right?
So once the volume becomes available, the gas fills it. You remove the barrier, the gas fills all available space. Apparently, our world exists differently, however. The 2 differing air pressure systems existing next to each other without a physical barrier defies 2 natural laws. The first is the second law of thermodynamics, which states that high pressure immediately and often violently flows to low air pressure, filling the container. This means that the air on Earth could never exist, like the moon supposedly, because the low pressure of space would never let it form without a container. This leaves many to hypothesize that the Earth is a closed system, which allows for this air pressure system that we enjoy to actually exist. And the other law that it breaks is Boyle's gas law. This law states that as you increase the volume of a container, you decrease the pressure within that container. This is illustrated very well by how our lungs work. We don't suck air into our lungs, we create a low pressure inside our chest by using our diaphragm muscle to increase the volume of our lungs, which decreases the air pressure by expanding the container, our lungs, and as Boyle's gas law demands, the higher air pressure must immediately flow to the low air pressure system, achieving equalization. But there's a pressure gradient, we're told, That's what the defender of the globular Earth will state. Well, I would say that pressure gradients can indeed exist in a container. This can be demonstrated by filling an enclosed container with different types of gases, different densities. The heavier, more dense gas will settle the bottom, and the lighter one will find its equilibrium near the top of the closed container. This would be strong evidence to suggest that a pressure gradient can indeed exist in a container with a lid and enclosure. In fact, there's a YouTuber by the name of Good Times for All on YouTube. His name is Zachary Zabala. He demonstrated a pressure gradient in as little as a 10-pound tank in a video that he did earlier this year. Imagine if we were able to build a container with a lid many miles high and many miles wide. I would submit to you that if we were able to measure the air pressure at the top of the container compared to the pressure reading at the bottom of the closed container, we would find a significant difference, one that would correlate with our reality. And if we can demonstrate it in a container like Zach's, that small, that he did in his demonstration, the evidence that we live in an enclosure of some sort is very strong. What mainstream science is essentially asking us to do is to suspend our understanding of the natural laws that govern our world. When considering how our world was created, how it was formed, we need to just accept that the cosmos is not governed by the natural laws that exist here on Earth. Unthinking respect for authority is the greatest enemy of truth. Mainstream science cannot model or demonstrate their claims, but we can model and demonstrate how the laws of nature work any day of the week. Michio Kaku, professor of theoretical physics at the City College of New York, may have said it best when describing how the mainstream scientific community is faring when it comes to gaining an understanding of our cosmology. This clip from the movie The Principle, and I think really puts an exclamation point on my presentation today.
A crisis in cosmology. Usually in science, if we're off by a factor of 2 or a factor of 10, we call that horrible. We say something's wrong with the view. We're off by a factor of 10. However, in cosmology, we're off by a factor of 10 to the 120. That is 1 with 120 zeros after it. This is the largest mismatch between theory and experiment in the history of science.
120 zeros. That's the factor that they admit that they're off in understanding our cosmology. I want to thank you very much for your time. Sorry I had to go through the last bit of that a little bit fast. I want to really quickly invite you to listen to my podcast, Dome Life with Paul and Mitch, available on most major platforms. And a big thanks to Mitchell, my co-host, because he helped me put this together. And Truth Frequency Radio Show with Roxanne. Roxanne, are you here? There she is. Every Wednesday night here in GMT 1 a.m. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, my email, paulandtheplane.com. I'd love to hear from you. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the convention. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
I must admit, I didn't actually see all of Paul's presentation, but the bit I did see, I thought it was really good. But then I'm a little bit biased because I love these guys. We are now going to bring up Iru, but as before, we need a couple of minutes just to actually let him get set up. One of the things that I've actually been thinking about for a little while is that with the equator, we're meant to be moving at 1,040 miles an hour, and in the UK, that I obviously recognise, we're told it's about 630 miles an hour. And basically, when you actually have the spin, that with this moon, it's meant to be moving at 15 feet per second. And if you take it that where the moon landed, that Paul was showing on video, let's assume that it's only a third of that, and it's only moving at 5 feet. So the way I look at it is that when the moon lander went up and the camera was tracking it, 2 seconds later it would have moved 10 feet. But when you look at it, it looks like it's going straight up. So I always question that. So anyway, Iru, there's only 2 speakers that was actually at the UK convention that are now here today, and that's allegedly Dave and Iru. And so it's really, really great that we're actually still keeping in good communication with these guys. So anyway...
Wait a second.
Oh, you're there? Okay. So anyway, we're just going to be a couple of seconds. So I just want to mention as well that lunch, 12 o'clock, is just to the area here. If you're going to smoke, even though there's an open area where there's an observation area, you apparently, I think it's the law within the Netherlands, that you have to go outside of the building if you want to smoke whatever that smoking is. So if you can just obviously keep within the law, that would be excellent. What we're going to do is, when Iru's doing his presentation, when we break, we're going to have 1 hour and we're going to start dead on 1 o'clock. So if you can do that, that would be excellent. So thank you. Right, while we're waiting for 2 secs, like I did earlier, is there any thoughts, any questions that anyone wants to raise?
And the
yeah, 12. It's 12 to 1 is lunch. Oh, thanks, Dave.
I got a question for the audience, and it's actually from my son, because he was wondering, is there any people that believe in flat Earth and don't believe in God? Anyone? So no agnostic or atheist?
Okay.
There's one person who contacted me who claims to be an atheist, and he's also a flat earther. But that's super rare. We haven't really found that. We see the other movement consistently from atheists, materialists who had been indoctrinated in that way, through this information changing their minds into something.
Between fate.
That's me. I was that.
Great.
I was the atheist for 40 years, and the flat Earth was the last straw, basically. Yeah.
And on my side, over the years, I was agnostic. And then what I did, I spent a few years really thinking long and hard about it. So I thought I was thinking long and hard. And when I got into Flat Earth just over 4 years ago with Mark Sargent's Flat Earth Blues, at the time, I was a massive Alien fan, and I was massively... I apologise, but I was also massively into that I'd evolved from, or I use the word evolved, from agnostic to an atheist. And it didn't take long before eventually I just replaced that with aliens are a load of rubbish and there's a creator. I don't really necessarily go hard on the Bible. I don't actually also support religion because I think it's a manipulation of man. And this is only my thoughts. I'm not saying this is part of the convention's thoughts. It's just mine. But for me personally, I actually think that we can't just have just arrived. There's just too many bits. But anyway, that's not me trying to lecture you. That's just giving you my take. While Iru is slowly getting there.
I'm ready.
Okay, thanks very much for being with us, guys. This is going to go on for 1 hour approximately, and then we're going to break for lunch. But I will come up and just say a good, just 2 seconds after Iru's presentation. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Didi, Gary, and all the people involved in the organization of this event. It's not easy, as you know, so thank you for bringing me here, and thank you for all the people in the community that support me to be here today. It's for me, it's not easy. Came from Argentina, and so I really appreciate all the people that support me. I hope you understand my English. Maybe I'm going to invent some words in the fly, but it's necessary for me. And I want to start because, my presentations are mixed a little bit between science and between history and symbology. So this time is not going to be different. So I'm going to make an holistic view of my perspective on the flat Earth, because for me, right now, after 5 years of being, a researcher and a lot of people putting calculations and observations and experiments and out there for everyone to look at, it's very easy to understand that the Earth is flat and a stationary plane. You don't need more than study the mechanics of the fluid and make some observations and, looking into the history of the science to know that something is wrong. There are people that are lying to us all the time in other situation of the life, like the politicians or the education system, the pharmaceutics, and the sports. Even there are corruption out there in any directions we look. So there is no easy, difficult to understand that we've been told lies all our life. But for me, it's really important to understand the foundations of our scientific, institutions and profit. So for anyone who are new to the flat Earth and want to at least have some principal point to understand why we believe that the Earth is a stationary plane, I recommend this kind of observations, experiments, and the first one are related with the motion of the Earth, the four first ones. Then we have a few other for understanding our Big Bang cosmology. We have also mechanisms to understand how in the antiquity, the cosmology, the science of the antiquity, measure our sky, our movement in the sky. The Antikythera mechanism is one of the devices for me, one of the most important devices for understanding our sky. The gyroscope, the spirit level, the compact, the sextants, long-range laser test, the long-range observation with infrared lenses like G. Tolan Media doing his channel. He's amazing. The high-altitude balloon cameras, the long-distance microwave and radio wave. Our senses, of course, that will be nice to, to pay attention, because sometimes the modern science trying to take off our senses, and supposedly they lying to us. So that is why we create instruments to try to contrast our senses. And when our senses and the instrument detect the same thing, that is something to take into account very seriously. For example, like the rotation of the Earth. The J-Toll and media, for me, make one of the best observations of long-distance objects or landscape that supposedly we are not able to see if we live in a sphere of 12,000 kilometers of diameter. We are talking about these observations. Some of these observations take place more than 400 miles to the horizon, and supposedly at that altitude, at 10 kilometers from a plane, we only see 100 kilometers to the horizon, and this is like sometimes is 3 times more than that observation. So, and you can clearly see in his videos, you can clearly see the horizon even continue behind the mountains. So that is more an evidence that we live in really big plane, and the horizon is always at eye level than the sphere of the size that the science priest give us. So I just pointed out this very quickly because it's not the main subject of my presentation, but I know that there is maybe new people to this, and this could be, just a starting point to understand why we don't believe that we live in a sphere. And I say believe because for everyone out there is a belief. Nobody is an astronaut, nobody go into the space. So if you want to believe that for me it's okay. We have a long distance observation also in Argentina, which defied the globe measurement from Uruguay. You can see a lot of buildings to Buenos Aires that supposedly we have 54 kilometers away from the coast of Uruguay to Buenos Aires, Argentina, and there is almost 200 meters of curvature. And if you research how many buildings are more tall than that height, we don't have even one. So of course, at least you must have to, you must be see, some buildings, just the tip of the building, or the most highest, like for example, this tower is not yet finished, but supposedly it's going to measure 200 meters. But the rest of the building, that's the tallest building in Buenos Aires, are these only 10 to 12 buildings, and all the height is 172 meters, 160 meters, 145 meters. So you have only 12 to 13 buildings to see. And for example, this guy filmed from Uruguay to Buenos Aires, and I put some contrast filter to see, but you can see clearly that we see a lot of buildings more than supposedly the observations allow. And this is just a regular guy filming from 3 meters height from the coast. And if you do the math, this is not possible. Because here, in fact, you can clearly see there is not even the refraction issue. This is a clear image. Of course, the building are cut off because perspective, because the air layers, how the light behave in the medium of the air. But you can clearly see, if you start counting, you're going to see more than 30 buildings. And most of them, they are not even in the coast of Buenos Aires. It's deep inside the city. So this kind of observation, for me, it's crucial to understand if you want to, check for yourself via an observation. Of course, everyone here knows the Joshua Nowicki observation of the Chicago to Michigan. Of course, we understand how the refractions work, how it's not the curvature of the air that is changing, it's just how the light or how the objects behave when you look through air. It's just that. It's not based on curvature. I'm not going to spend so much time in this, but we can reproduce that on lab. For example, at the top of here, in the left top corner, you can see how this nanotube of carbon, there are just changing the temperature of that, and you can see how change the index of refraction. You can have like invisible, or you can bring it back to the view, and that is what happened with the air and the light, if you want to see in that way. So we have all these kind of phenomena that explain why we don't see sometimes infinity into the distance. It's just a matter of the climate, weather, the climate conditions, and how these phenomena interact with this layer of air. So I can spend more time in this. Sorry for my fast presentation on that topic. I did that on Globebuster and the Shannon's channel, so if you want to check out. But like I tell you before, for me it's more important how we receive our education. And for that, I'm going to start via UNESCO, because along the way you're going to see that we are being like someone's spell, like a spell on us, because all the time that you're trying to find the root of our institution, there are wizards driving that institutions. Came from the religious orders, and not the spiritual order, but the religious order. And anytime you look around, you're gonna see Jesuits, Zionists, like wizards trying to deceive us. And in our education institution, that is the same. If you look into, for example, who are behind after the Second World War, who was the first director of UNESCO, you're going to find that the Huxley family is behind that. And the first one was Julian Huxley, which was the brother of Aldous Huxley, and everyone knows maybe Aldous Huxley for his Happy World history book. And so, you can imagine that there are brothers. Of course, they came from parents that they are all in the same agenda. There are, all financed Charles Darwin work. There are all eugenicists. There are all these kind of people that give us our supposedly free education, right? Nothing is free in our days, so there is been something behind every time the word free is in front of something. And the education is important, because if you, for example, Vladimir Lenin said, give me just one generation of the young people and I will transform the world, the whole world. And I spell it bad, I believe, transform. But that's true, because if you start looking into the history from Galileo to our time, it's only past 6-8 generations of human. Nothing more than that. And at that time, who have access to education? Just rich people. That was just a tiny group of humans that have access to knowledge. So the important is that we know that where it's come from, that knowledge. And for that, let me just play this video.
Welcome back to The World Over. In May, Pope Francis said he referenced a visit from extraterrestrials, create an interesting opportunity to discuss the relationship between faith and science. Are the two in opposition? Joining us tonight is a man who has literally pondered the mysteries of the heavens as part of his job. He is an astronomer at the Vatican Observatory and the president of the Vatican Observatory Foundation, a Jesuit, and the co-author of the new book, Would You Baptize an Extraterrestrial? We're delighted to have joining us Brother Guy Consolmagno in the studio. Great to see you, brother.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I want to start with this notion that people have, that there's a conflict between faith and science. You don't see it that way.
Well, of course not. I mean, here I am. I've got a collar and an MIT ring, which proves you can be at the same time a fanatic and a nerd. and I am. I'm something of a nerd about my religion, but I'm a fanatic about my science.
And that is a very important distinction, because I am a nerd of my religion, but a fanatic of my science. And, you know, if you are fanatic, you lose your mind sometimes. You know, you're going to trying to justify everything that you need to preserve that, you know, that fanatism, if you want to see it that way.
And what people have to remember is that science came from the church. What people have to remember is that science came from the church.
What people have to remember is that science came from the church.
Yeah. It was invented in the medieval universities. Yeah. It was invented in the medieval universities.
Yeah. It was invented in the medieval universities.
Why was the church interested? Because it was interested in science, because it's interested in the physical universe, because it's interested in creation as an expression of the Creator.
So people must remember that the science came from the church. Our science, at least, the occidental part of the world. The first university is created by the Vatican in the 1600s. And 58 years later came the Royal Society, founded, of course, by England, but helped by the Vatican. So when you start to look in that in the big perspective, you're going to see that the first scientific guy, of course, they are all Jesuit priests, because the Jesuit order is the military and the scientific arm of the Vatican. And when they, you know, tied up everything, they give that free information, free into quotes, to the Royal Society. And after a few centuries, it became the free education for us. But it's all, the roots is still the same. And in science, for example, it's very important that this is for Start Talk with the Grace Tyson, and they have a program which, you know, talk about religions and science. And this video is going to be a little part in English and a little part in Spanish with subtitles, because I don't know why, but National Geographic took apart the most important part for me, and I can't find the complete episode. But here you can see how important for the heliocentric model is the Jesuit order.
The American Museum of Natural History in New York City, and beaming out across all of space and time. This is Star Talk, where science and pop culture collide. And tonight's topic, science and religion. And so we combed the landscape, and we found a Jesuit priest. This is the academic order of the Catholic Church. And we have with us Father Martin. Welcome to Star Talk.
Thank you very much.
All right.
They could be invited some Rosicrucian or some Franciscan, I don't know which is the name in English, but no, they've invited a Jesuit, of course. So there is going to come the part in Spanish.
Solo quiero mandar un saludo a los jesuitas, que la Compañía de Jesús es un brazo científico importante de la Iglesia Católica y que de hecho su progreso tremendo, el de los jesuitas, contribuyeron a nuestro entendimiento a la medida del universo.
And that is the key, because the progress of the Jesuit order contribute to understanding our measurement of the universe, because they are the creator of the astronomical unit based on the distance from the Earth to the Sun. If we don't have that measure, that 196 million of miles, they don't have a unit to extrapolate to the rest of the universe. So that is why it's so important in the heliocentric model to achieve that measurement. And they really spend a lot of money and blood trying to come up with that measurement, because without that, they don't have any clue how to lie us about that kind of, how it is distant from here to Saturn, or, the Polaris. That is all based in that astronomical unit. So, not only that, but,
contribuyeron a nuestro entendimiento a la medida del universo.
The Jesuit order is the order with most astronomers in the history of the
Copernicus
world.
publications, it is probable the Jesuit order has produced more astronomers than any other demographic in Europe. That, ostensibly, a religious order should produce so many scientists should cause surprise. However, as these scientists have focused nearly exclusively in but one area, this gives us reason to question.
And that gives us reason to question, because nothing of this is told in school or in universities. They just skip forward all this part of the history. So for me, the heliocentric model is a perfect representation that in our days we have computers, so all the math that you will, in the past, they need to be instruct us in terms of mathematical to our brain process numbers into images, numbers of measurements or distance into images. Right now they don't need that because they have computers. So they just process all the numbers in images via computer. We don't need anymore, you don't need that your slave are, instructed slavery. You just put image out there, and if you research and read the protocol of science, one of the protocol, the number 2, is referred to how they create agents in the school, in the educational system to instruct us via images. It doesn't matter. The people right now, our childs in the school are educated via images. They don't. If you doesn't present an image, they don't even can imagine what you're trying to say, because the system of being indoctrinated via images is more productive than just simple words and make it, trying to reason, trying to, become razonar, ¿cómo se dice? Razonar? Rational about what you're trying to say. No, you just present an image and you cut off all kind of other possibilities. You just try, just tie to that image. And it's on purpose of that. It's all purpose. It's not just a random thing. It all came in our day from UNESCO. And they don't talk about the trivium, the quadrivium, or others methods of education, which in fact they refer, for example, this system of education that came from the Greeks, they refer to the liberal art in the expression of the medieval concept inherited from classical antiquity, cultivated by free men and opposite to the servile art typically of a servant or slave. And our education system that we receive today is based on the slavery part of this. We don't receive a free education. So I'm going to skip a little forward because I see the time, and I believe someone took me 50 minutes from my original time. I don't know if 30 minutes passed so fast, but I'm going to try to, 35. Ah, okay. Well, 10 minutes more. It's 10 minutes more. So, what I'm trying to say is, for me, when Nikola Tesla said that famous quote that if you want to find the secret of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration, I try to not only think in terms of experiment, just in electricity and magnetism, but also in terms of the voice, in sounds, in our own thoughts. Are, if you want to see in that way, there are also vibrations in our body. That is why, for me, it's very important the Germanic medicine. If you want to go to the Chinese, whatever. For me, the Germanic medicine, at least for Occidental part of the world, is very nice to study. But after all, everything that we have inside is a vibration. It's a frequency, because if you're trying to imagine something right now that make you cry, there is no physical place to that image that make you cry. But at the end, it's make you cry. So that is why all the seeds are, or not all, but the majority are psychological, because the word psyche means soul. So what is the soul? You cannot find in the particular spot in location, in time and space. So trying to understand from this perspective, you can, use this quote to understand in terms of maybe experiment part, but also in terms of the spiritual part, if you want to see in that way. So I'm going to skip forward a little bit because I want to, tie this with the heliocentric model. And one of the best thing that these people recommend us to imagine, the majority of the of the hypotheses or theories that they give us start with that word. Imagine that you are in that. Imagine that you have. All the time they trying to bring that imagination to our life. And one of the most important is gravity, of course. If they don't have gravity, they cannot support their model. But when you go to the scientific guys trying to explain gravity, and I know many of you saw this, this is what it came out.
You have no idea. Okay, next question.
Wow.
No, here's the difference. We can describe gravity. We can say what it does to other things. We can measure it, predict with it. But when you start asking, like, what it is, I don't know.
I hate to say this, but there's no such thing as the force of gravity.
What? I wish I didn't know that.
Sorry, say that again, Marcus.
There's no such thing as the force of gravity.
Well, explain that.
Newton said that if an object falls, it's because there's a mysterious force called gravity pulling it down. But Isaac Newton himself was not satisfied by that. Objects move because they're pushed, not pulled. So what is pushing this? Newton didn't know. So Newton simply threw his hands up and said, I don't know. So I'm going to invent something called gravitational pull. And said, I don't know. So I'm going to invent something called gravitational pull.
So, in fact, in our times, it was, I see this, I cannot remember the YouTube channel where I see this, but even, for example, people that, like Steve Jobs, it's been involved in this kind of study, because why he's going to say this if he's not interested?
The elements of discovery are around you. You don't need a computer to know. I mean, here. Why does that fall? You know why? Nobody knows why. Nobody in the entire world knows why that falls. We can describe it pretty accurately, but no one knows why. I don't need a computer to get a kid interested in that, to spend a week playing with gravity and trying to understand it and come up with reasons why.
That words, for me, it's the same words that the Grace Tyson uses. I don't know which was the first who said it. But remember that, for example, this guy, Steve Jobs, the first Apple computer logo, it was this Newton with the Apple here. This is not the first one of those logos. And of course, it has a few. If you research about the life of Steve Jobs and the computer itself, the Silicon Valley itself, it's also made by occultist guys. I don't say that Steve Jobs was one of those, but the top of the head of Silicon Valley, they are occultists. And of course, in our days, we have our computer software that create those images to present us. For example, the heliocentric model, they all had all this symbology behind it. For example, one of the most applications uses in our day, like the Adobe Suite, suddenly after the Flat Earth came out, they start using images of astronauts, aliens, horizons. Even in his promos, they use this concept of the Flat Earth Society, pyramids, eyes, even, for example, a Baphomet in his logo of After Effects, infinity planes, pyramids all the time. Adobe with the pyramid Autodesk changed his logo, its logo from the 90s to 2000, creating this pyramid. The NVIDIA logo is the all-seeing eye. Even Microsoft in the original logo has this tiny pyramid between the O and the S. Sun Microsystem, the original logo of Intel was a pyramid. I mean, if you start looking, it's all around us. This is magic for day, it's like a wizardry for us, if you want to see in that way. But talking about gravity, I'm not going to spend much time, but it's all based on assumption, because for the gravitational, the big G, they need to assume all these measurements. The only thing that you can really test is just the acceleration of that object falling to the ground. That is the only empirical evidence that you have. But the rest is just all assumption. And they took a lot of centuries to become up with that, because the first value and the only value they have was this. And then they create like a reverse engineering and they have Eratosthenes at the beginning with the radius of the Earth. Then they know how to take the density via volume. So they spend a few centuries doing this, and then they extrapolate and calculate. Who is going to believe that they measure the weight of the Earth, and the mass of the Earth? How you do it? Of course, the official science is going to bring Cavendish experiment, and it's all indirect models. It's all indirect measurements. They don't have any direct measurements. Of course, the radio of the Earth, we know that the most deep hole that we made to trying to test that is just the 0.2%. Then you have, for example, imagine trying to know how the very center of the supposedly sphere of the planet. Because every time they measure and they use the big G, they assume the very center to the very center of the other object. But who knows what is the very center of Mars, of Saturn, but all the things that they use in space is just in our imagination. So they can use whatever they want to say us that we're going to put this satellite base on that, on this, and it's not any collateral damage, because there is nothing out there. So they don't have any, real risk in that sense. And for example, when you're trying to came out with densities, imagine trying to calculate the density in our Earth with all the different materials, dirt, humans, foliage, trees, people walking. It's impossible to know what is inside the Earth. How how to measure the weight of the Earth if you only go down 0.2% of the radio? You don't know even which are the materials in the 90% of the sphere. So how you came about with the density of the Earth is impossible. And of course, when you go to the most important experiment to determine this, they are all from the Freemason Lodge. There you have Cavendish, and there you have Bouguer, which comes from, it's a French scientist, all with this, the hand symbol. So for me, the real equation for the gravity is more this than just the regular F equal, right? G equal. It's more like a Newton, Cavendish, Bouguer, Maskelyne with Eratosthenes. If you see in these history terms, it's more believable than the original formula that they give us. But they need to spend all this money and centuries trying to get this reverse engineering. So the sun, for me, it's an electromagnetic source, as the electrical universe, trying to explain. But of course, they mix all the time this, for example, this is from the book of Dr. Einstein. He said, a magnetic field and electrical field are physical realities, and that's true. Nobody can deny that because we can experiment. Nobody knows how a magnet works. We can describe, it's like the gravity, it's like the acceleration of the object towards the ground. Nobody knows what is going on. We can describe it. We can describe what a magnet does, but we cannot explain how it that object does. Nobody, because you cannot find a particle involved in that attraction or repulsion. You can. It's simply as that. But that is a physical reality. So they trying to mix. The gravitational field is much a physical reality as an electromagnetic field. So they trying to, say, okay, that magnet behavior. Well, imagine a gravitational field is something like that. You can see there. Well, imagine it's something like that. And when you start looking at the movement of the sun and how maybe this is just my research and this is not an empirical confirmation because nobody goes there and touch the object and really analyze. But when you start to look into the path of the sun, you're going to see the analemma, right? And when you see from the perspective of the ground, the analemma is like a number 8 with some part of the 8 more biggest than the other part. Depends of what part of the world you are. So that means that, there is going to be involved like an elliptical orbit of movement, and that refers that there is going to be a change in acceleration because we all have 24 hours all the days, but this object make different path, different area. They cover different area in the same time. So when we look like this, we perceive like there is some kind of 8, and maybe if we have the possibility to look from the top, maybe we start understand that it's like just a circle going up and down, because as you know, the seasons in the heliocentric model are explained by the distance and the change in the angle of rotation of the Earth. But the most important thing is that is in the distance of the light source. So we can explain the same thing. Let me just go back a little bit and put the play again. We can explain the same thing, because if we know that that object called sun is more up in some part of the world, and more when we are, if you look at this into the Gleason map, you're going to see that the bottom part is more big because it's when the sun is in the south. So it needs to cover more area, because if you look into the Gleason map, it's going to be more wide, of course, the circle. The perimeter is more big than the center. So when the sun, when you have summer here in Europe, the sun is more height, but it makes a small circle. When we have summer, the suns go down and make a more biggest circle. That is the analemma. But the season is explained in the flat Earth in the same way as the heliocentric trying to explain. It's the distance to the light source. It's simply as that. Simple as that, at least for me, of course, right? So what I'm trying to look to show in that computer graphic is that we see like a number 8, but if we have the opportunity to see from the top, it may be a circle. It's almost an elliptical orbit, but in more circle fashion with different altitude. Just that. So you can see in this way, if you want, you can see just in this spiral, fashion. The moon has also an analemma, and that is why maybe they need to explain via the second law of Kepler, they need to explain that supposedly it's the Earth that accelerate and decelerate during 1 year, because they still need to reverse engineering that number 8 created by the sun. So if you want to assume that the sun is fixed and we rotate around the sun, we still have that shape. So the reverse engineering of that is like the Earth accelerates towards, some part of the orbit, and then decelerate because they need to complete these 24 hours each day. It's all the days are the same kind. We have the same kind of hours. So this is just the analemma, the time lapse of analemma in different. Let me just in different point of view. This is the number 8, and if you extrapolate that every day and the same hour, you're gonna have this kind of path when you observe this in the sky. So let me skip a little forward, of course, and sorry for my fast presentation, but like Paul talks about the different distances along the history that they used to make, his model, the model, the heliocentric model. All the time they change it without any consequences because it's not real things. At that time, you don't even need to think in terms of lying about the space technology. So you just drop numbers. But the most important thing for me about this is the connection to the Jesuit order, because all these guys, supposedly, the guy who came with the fixed number of 93 million miles was Maximilian Hell. And he was from the Jesuit order, and he's like the master that create the astronomical unit. And let me just, then came, for example, even for the temperature of the sun, it's involved a Night Lord, which was Kelvin, which belonged to the Royal Society. So all the time we have this connection that, one approved the other, but they are friends, so why they are going to be against one of each other, right? In fact, in our, normal history, they say that Hell was also interested in the magnetotherapy, which is something that our science is still sometimes deny, or saying that it doesn't, that doesn't have any effect on us. But we are electrical magnetical organisms. So of course you want to trying to, cure or change something in our vibration, you're gonna trying to use one of the best objects out there, which is magnets. And even the history said that the publication of his results was delayed, and some, especially Joseph, accused Hell to posthumously of falsifying his result, because when this expedition came along to measure via the transit of Venus, like Paul explained before, the only important result to take into account that measurement was the results presented by this Jesuit. All the other astronomers, it just, they present the numbers, but the final number to really, say, okay, this is the real distance the sun to the earth, was presented by this guy. But this guy took 1 year to present it. So one of, most of these colleagues say, hey man, we talk about present this, quickly. You cannot take 1 year to present this paper, because I start thinking that you are doing a lot of math trying to, things that make the things work. And anytime you look out there, you're going to see these kind of orders involved, and all. Even his contemporary, colleagues accuse these orders to falsify numbers and results. But nothing, I believe if you go out there and trying to talk with an astronomer and ask how they measure the distance to the sun, maybe he explained it. And when you ask, and who was it? I at least in my experience, anytime that I talk with these guys, they never knew was Maximilian Hell. So the heliocentric model architects, the first one, are these guys. They come from the church. That is why I put that video at the beginning. Even our Big Bang theory came from the church. And this guy, they don't want to be in the front row, and never. So they create these other layers, like the Royal Academy, and the Royal Academy, creates, if you want to see that way, the UNESCO. So anytime you're trying to find the top of the head, you have all these layers that you never. How many people out there, expose Jesuit? Because there is a lot of people talking about Zionists and Jews, but nobody say nothing about Jesuit. Jesuit is just, like normal, just saints walking in his feet in the jungle, drinking tea and contemplating the sky. But nobody at least exposed the Jesuit order, which is the military and academic order that create all the educational system. And of course, they create the heliocentric model. So I have so less time, but it's all about, sun worship again. And this is my opinion, of course, but when you go into the religions from the beginning, maybe not the ancient religion in terms of shamanic religions, but the majority of religions out there is just, they use the sun to represent his beliefs. I say not all, of course, but the majority, for me at least in my research, is all refer all the time to the sun. And I believe that is, for them, they are very important to use the sun as his model, because right now, for example, the sun is what gives the opportunity to create measurement, to create the heliocentric model. Of course, in our minds, not in reality. In reality, we see the sun move in the sky, we see the sun at the same size of the moon. They need to avoid our senses. So Georges Lemaitre not only talked about the Big Bang theory, but he was one of the first proposed in the atom model, because they use the atom analogy to, trying to say, this is the orbital mechanics, like an atom, but imagine in the big scale. But when you look, nobody see an atom ever. Nobody see the particle. They use the word particle. Define me particle. I mean, show me a particle of something. Nobody can show nothing. In fact, in the London conference, I asked one of the astrophysicists that, what is the particle in charge of a magnet? Because the magnet works. We don't need to go to the quantum, the quarks, the muons, that kind of name that they use. Show me a particle in charge of the mechanism of the magnet, and you cannot do it. It's fields, and what is a field? Show me a field. How can you bend time and space if you don't have geometry? It's impossible. It's impossible. I mean, show me a particle of time to bend it, because you need something physical. If you're going to say that we're going to bend something, you cannot bend love, for example. Bend being love, no, because that is a concept. You cannot bend it. You cannot transfer. If you want to see in physical terms, we are not talking philosophy, we are talking about science. So if you're going to bend time and space to justify your model, you need to show me that. We are waiting. So when you start to look into the, this concept between magnets and electricity in terms of symbology, of course this is the model of the atom god, because atom means sun god. That is why they use the atom model, because saying atom is like saying sun. It's just it's an analogy of that. So when you start looking into the electrical model of the electrical magnetism model of the sun, of course, in terms of color, all the time you refer to blue and red, to refer a magnet. So when you go to the religion, you're going to see that, for example, in the Catholic religion, the representation of Jesus always is in blue and red, with this like spherical yellow behind the head. And that is a symbology of the sun, because the sun is electrical and magnetic. And if Jesus represents the sun, of course, for the Catholic Church, they dress in electrical and magnetic color. So let me just go a little bit forward. Electric fields, you can see electric fields. Of course, you need a medium.
You can witness the electric field in action when using a plasma ball. The electric field around a plasma ball is strong enough to ionize mercury, neon, helium, and even the air itself.
but you all the time need some medium.
But
to
the effect weakens
have that,
with distance.
You know, that behavior, that physicality, if you want. If you see this light is not a light. There is a gas inside of that lamp. So how is we can see the sun out in the space, for example, in the vacuum of space, if you don't have any medium to transmit light or to project that light, because it's empty, supposedly, right? So I'm going to skip forward because I know some of you know the Dan Dimension videos talking about how these ionized gases can explain our sky in terms of the color that we see when it's a sunset, when it's a dusk, where we have daylight, night. It's really, there are really good videos out there, but let me just trying to go a little forward and because sometimes the people, when they see these kind of high altitude balloons, they trying to say that this is the curvature of the Earth, but that is more the curvature of the light, or you know, not the curvature of the light itself, but it's like the source, in this case the sun, that is producing this electromagnetic field is bending the gases that project the light. It's not because the light doesn't exist there is not an object called light. You just excite, if you want to see, ionize the gas that is carry on that, you know, vibration, if you want to see in that way. So let me just skip forward. For example, with the magnet, you are not bending the light there because there is no light. It's this radiation, it's this plasma, but you're all the time need a medium to project these kind of things. So have that in mind, how, for example, our color in the sky can reproduce in the lab. All our electricity that we see in our work can reproduce in the lab and, you know, small scale, and something that the majority of the heliocentric model can't do it. They cannot even reproduce the curvature of the water in the lab. They cannot even show us the curvature, the geometrical curvature of the Earth. So I really like to show a little more of the sun issues. Let me just play this and have...
Good afternoon. My name is Don Scott. The electric sun is a sort of a natural outgrowth of the electrical universe hypothesis. We know that there are magnetic fields actually had a circuit that showed the electric sun. What I'd like to do today is to show some of the problems of the so-called standard model. That word model should be plural, models, because for everything that we see in the sun, there seems to be a new model, or at least another patch on the previous existing model. Problems that I feel, at least, are fatal, absolutely fatal, for the models that are so-called accepted these days. And I would like to then demonstrate how precisely those problems are no problem at all for the electrical sun model. The big problem, the famous problem, is the missing neutrinos. The idea of this heat transport from the core to the surface. There are some oscillations in the sun's size and brightness, and of course oscillations in the solar wind, as somebody pointed out the other day. If there's a fusion reaction going on in the core, then how can does this reaction, does it have periodicities? That's never been discussed by nuclear physicists. There is actually a temperature minimum in the chromosphere. Where in the world does that come from? If the heat is all generated at the core, the temperature should get lower and lower and lower the further away you get from this thing. And all of a sudden you find there's a minimum and then the temperature increases. Totally inexplicable in light of the present standard so-called model or models. The sun actually oscillates in brightness from a few minutes to near an hour. So the thing is pulsating.
That is very important. I mean, talking about minute and hour in that big mass that they took about, like they take like 5 million of years to get a particle from the nucleus of the sun to the surface. But when you start studying, well, let me just finish the video.
Very rapidly. There's no way in this world, in this solar system, that that could happen. And the third one is, to me, astounding if you haven't heard about it. That is, there's an expansion and contraction of the sun in the size of the sun. The thing actually bulges and fluctuates in size like a balloon. And the extent of that bulging is 10 kilometers.
10 kilometers. How can you detect 10 kilometers in what is the size of the sun? So, but this pulsating is changing in brightness, is inflating and deflating how the FA core model it, for example. And so, you know, when you start to having this
and that happens
in mind,
in about a period of about 160 minutes.
You can understand maybe how.
Where did that come from? How do you
why
explain it from the so-called standard model?
Plane of existence is alive, and
They just ignore it.
dynamics, they just ignore it. Of course, this is something that if you're trying to talk about these things with astrophysicists, they don't even know, because they don't even study the electrical model of the universe. And let me just, because I have some 3 minutes plus 5 minutes more, but let me try to explain the sun visible in space.
So when you actually look at a source in outer space, it is not transmitted, light is not transmitted in the visible spectrum in outer space. The visible spectrum effect of the sun is created by the upper atmosphere. It will blind you, but you can't see it. What you see is the refraction of the sun in the upper atmosphere. That's all you see. And the minute you get out of the atmosphere, you got no reflection between you and that. You can't see.
No refraction between the sun and you, and maybe that is why we don't see stars, of course, but because you need a medium, a dense medium. That maybe they use, radio telescope for some of the study instead of just optical telescope. And this is just a simulation, do it by Arnold. Arnold is a render engine. This has a GoPro, of course, because I was doing this for other purpose. But here, if you pay attention, there is a little highlight, white highlight there, because I have a light on the top, projecting light to the ground. But you cannot see it, the light, because the computer software in our days, they're trying to mimic reality. So in order to see that light, I need to increase and add an atmosphere to the software. So when you,
en la computadora sucede lo mismo, la luz sigue estando.
Let me just take out my voice. When you start increasing the atmosphere, immediately you're going to see the light. And that is what I believe Dr. Lehman trying to explain. If you don't have a medium to project light, it's like our gases in our world is like the gas inside of this lamp. It's an analogy of that. And this was be a nice topic to discuss with Geran about the acceleration of gravity, if we could explain it by, electrical and magnetic behavior. I don't have the time to go with this, really sorry. But just give me 3 more minutes and let me trying to explain what is, for me at least, our magnetic field. Because in all the ancient culture we talk about, all the time they talk about the torus field, the ball field, this analogy of this toroidal, donut magnetic force. That's, maybe controlling the bull. It's like, I like to see in the way that is controlling yourself, your own field of energy. But also, we have sometimes, if you want to see this in the real life, in antiquity, we have this Sirijantra, which is an instrument, that is the word means. And we all see, this 2D depiction of this kind of art in this, of this concept. But when you transfer this to a 3D model, you're going to see, maybe this is from where is come all the magnet in our world. Because after all, we have a magnetic field, of course. We have a magnetic donut. So when you start looking in this kind of concept, you can clearly see that this that 2D picture It's just like a cross-section of 3D electrical and magnetic field that we have. This is, for the heliocentric model, this is the Van Allen belts. And when you're trying to see this this is from Tesla Apple YouTube channel, but here you can see how that field, you can have it in a magnet. So we cannot see particles, but we can see this field represented in terms of light lines. So this is just a ferrocell showing that the torus of a tiny magnet. Can you imagine that in the big scale? We don't know where is the center of our world. We, just trying, we take a compass and know how that compass point, but no, it's not only the Antarctic close. If you want to go to north, it's also close. We have Russian people there, we have American people there, military guys, of course. And maybe the most important, we have the climate, it's like this model is just an enclosed system, and maybe we are not able to achieve the limits of our world in terms of how this world was designed. So we have magnetic anomalies, for example, and that everybody knows about that. So when you start trying to say how the planets move, how they orbit, well, for me it's more explicable in terms of electromagnetism than the gravitational model, because if they don't even can reproduce the gravitational model in a scale, we don't even see how mass attract another mass, but we can see that in terms of electricity and magnetism. We see in labs how electricity can repel, can attract. So to finish, let me just explain how you can recreate.
We are so excited to be here today. So the first time I met Paul, this is many years ago, I walked in and he said, "Karen, I created this sun in a jar. I got this star in a jar." I'm like, "You're kidding me." He's like, "Oh yeah, all that stuff you've learned, put it all in the back of your brain because I'm going to show you something awesome." But this is just to show off. This is to show off Paul and some of the really neat ways that elements work and that chemistry works. And so
what this really is a oversimplification of what Dragon really is. It's combining a yin and yang energy frequency together, and they both attract. They want what each other has. There's value in that exchange. So, contrary to what they teach in science.
Contrary to what they teach in science.
The universe is actually magnetic and light.
The universe is actually magnetic and light.
And light is like, say, electricity,
it's not gravitational driven.
It's not gravitational driven.
So what this is I'm going to induce an electrical and magnetic field. This outer ball is the male or yang field, and this silver one inside is the yin or female field.
Fascinating.
So just like males and females like to do, they are going to go at it. So with no further ado, I'm going to now put this over in order to help. So instead of a sun actually being a fusion,
and trying to understand not just the first layer of what he's saying, but the second layer. It's all the time it's contradict the supposedly standard model. They for recreate like a tiny sun, they cannot base in anything that it's called standard. Contrary to what is teaching in science, the universe is magnetic and light. Contrary of the sun making the fusion, eating his own, hydrogen and helium, we made so everything is
eating its own hydrogen and helium, and over time, it's going to use all of its fuel. It's actually the sun is actually being powered.
And this is very important. Nobody knows how the sun works, and it's all right because nobody can go to check it. But all the time, this guy that trying to recreate this object in the sky, they need to say it's powered by something else, right?
Powered by something else. There's something else that's acting on that field, if you will, that's creating that sun.
There's no fusion in the sun. They don't know how the sun works.
Well, this is Eric
It's a transformer. Transforms from some other dimension. It's not burning anything. It doesn't have to. It's a converter.
Of what?
I don't know. Nobody knows. But that's what it does. That's the only thing it can do, because that's how everything works.
So the sun is not visible in that.
Not in free space. It's only invisible when gross matter becomes involved, like the Earth's atmosphere and envelope and the surface of the moon or whatever. That makes the light. So that means there's no time delay. So the whole time delay thing is meaningless. It doesn't take light years. There are no light years because there's no light. So that means that the light you see from the distant stars isn't 4 million years old. It could be only minutes old. It could be instantaneous. All the theories collapse when you can't see the stars in outer space.
And you cannot see it. This is about 400 kilometers, 40 kilometers up in the atmosphere. This arm is blocking the sun to, studying the atmosphere. And look how the shadows is diverging from the central point. I say that to Eratosthenes, that he assumed that the parallel rays came, the sun projecting parallel rays. So I don't have much time.
Tell us something about what the sky actually.
I don't have time delay. It left me a few things about the stars, the sonoluminescence thing, even the symbology behind the alien invasion that is referred all the time with the god Pan. The theory behind the how our life came to the earth. It's called panspermia. It's the sperm of Pan, because they use all the time Pangea. Jack Parson, in fact, he was one of the worships of this culture. I don't have much time, but just let me give. Oh, it's gone. Okay. Okay. Well. Okay, guys. Thank you. Thank you for being here. No, it's okay.
I do apologise that we had to obviously rush it, but we're trying to keep on schedule. I just want to mention that Douglas Folt has got his book, that's a fiction book about flat Earth. That's actually a good read. I actually bought it the other day. We've also got Mark Devlin has actually got his book about resonance frequency. No, sorry, about the music industry. That's actually worth looking at. We're going to be back here at 1 o'clock. If you can actually, I know it's been a long morning, and I apologise for that. But because we're only doing this over one day, we've obviously a little bit of a clock. So see you in about 55 minutes. Thank you.